Tonight, you will hear stories that have traveled through centuries, carried in the hearts of those who discovered something precious. That peace is not something to build, but something to uncover. Each teaching we explore points toward a way of being that brings natural rest, not through striving, but through seeing clearly what has always been true. Before we begin, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Please share in the comments below. The Buddha's wisdom is often thought to be complex or mystical, something that requires years of study to grasp. But at its core, it's remarkably simple. It teaches us to stop fighting with reality, to release what we cannot control, and to find the peace that lives in acceptance rather than resistance. As you listen tonight, there's nothing you need to remember or figure out. These stories aren't tests or lessons to master. They're more like gentle rain falling on dry ground, soaking in where they need to, nourishing what's ready to grow. Let them work on you in their own way, in their own time. Now, settle yourself completely. Feel how the bed or chair beneath you holds your entire weight. Notice how your breath moves naturally through you without any effort or control. There's nothing to do, nowhere to go. Just this moment, just this breath. Let your body soften with each exhale. Release your shoulders, soften your jaw. Let your hands rest open and easy. Take a slow, deep breath in, filling yourself with calm, and release, letting yourself sink even deeper into rest. Beautiful. Let's begin our journey together with our first teaching. The Buddha once said something that sounds almost contradictory at first, that true freedom comes not from gaining more, but from needing less. We spend so much of our lives accumulating, more possessions, more knowledge, more experiences, more control, believing that having more will finally bring us the peace we seek. But the Buddha discovered something different. He found that peace doesn't come from addition, but from subtraction. Not from grasping, but from releasing. Not from filling ourselves up, but from emptying ourselves out. When we hold tightly to things, ideas, outcomes, even our own opinions, we create tension. The very act of gripping disturbs our natural calm. But when we learn to hold things lightly, to let them come and go like clouds across the sky, something shifts. A spaciousness opens up. A lightness returns. This doesn't mean we stop caring or stop engaging with life. It means we stop exhausting ourselves, trying to force everything to match our preferences. We learn to dance with what is, rather than fighting for what we wish would be. Let's explore a story that illuminates this teaching. In a monastery famous for its scholarly debates and philosophical discussions, there arrived a new student named May, who puzzled everyone by her silence. While other students constantly asked questions, challenged teachings, and engaged in elaborate discussions about Buddhist philosophy, May simply listened, nodded, and returned to her meditation. The other students found this frustrating. They were proud of their intellectual engagement, their ability to analyze complex concepts, and their sophisticated questions. May's silence seemed like a criticism of their approach, or worse, like she wasn't intelligent enough to participate. One day, after a particularly intense discussion about the nature of emptiness, a senior student named Takeo approached May. "You never ask questions," he said. Don't you have doubts? Don't you want to understand these teachings more deeply? May looked at him with clear, calm eyes. I understand enough to practice, she said simply. But there's so much complexity, so many layers of meaning. How can you not have questions? I have one question, May replied. Am I suffering less? If my practice reduces suffering, then I'm understanding. If not, then no amount of questions and answers will help. Takeo was taken aback. He realized that despite all his questions and discussions, despite his vast accumulation of knowledge about Buddhist philosophy, he was just as anxious, just as unsettled as when he had arrived at the monastery. He knew more, certainly, but he suffered no less. The monastery's abbot, Master Gensho, had been observing May quietly. Unlike the other students who sought her out for teaching constantly, May seemed to learn by watching, by practicing, by experiencing directly, rather than by asking for explanations. One afternoon, Master Gensho was working in the garden when May came to help him. They worked together in silence for an hour, pulling weeds, tending plants. Finally, Gensho spoke. You don't ask questions like the others. Why? May continued her work for a moment before responding. When I'm thirsty, I drink water. I don't ask about the chemistry of H2O or debate the philosophical implications of thirst. The direct experience of drinking satisfies thirst in a way that talking about water never could. She pulled another weed carefully, examining its roots before setting it aside. The other students have many questions about enlightenment, about emptiness, about the nature of mind. But they could discuss these things forever and never experience what the words point toward. I'd rather practice one moment with full attention than discuss 1,000 concepts about practice. Gensho smiled. You understand something they haven't yet learned. The teachings are like a finger pointing at the moon. Most people study the finger endlessly, analyzing it, asking questions about it, debating its exact position. But you're looking where the finger points. May nodded. I watch you, she said simply. The way you move through the garden with full attention. The way you respond to people with presence rather than scripted wisdom. The way you sit in meditation without strain or performance. These teach me more than any discussion could. What have you learned by watching? Gensho asked. That peace doesn't come from understanding everything intellectually. It comes from being fully present to what is. That wisdom isn't accumulated knowledge but direct seeing. That the questions that seem so important eventually dissolve when you stop feeding them with attention and instead simply practice. She paused in her work, looking at the master directly. The other students ask you hundreds of questions. I have only one. Am I doing the practice correctly? And your answer is in how you nod or don't nod when you see me sitting. That's all I need. Over the following years, something interesting happened. The students who had asked the most questions, who had engaged in the most elaborate discussions, often left the monastery still searching, still unsatisfied, still believing that the answer was in some concept they hadn't yet grasped. But May stayed, and her practice deepened. She didn't become a great scholar or a famous teacher, but people noticed a quality in her presence, a settledness that comes from direct understanding rather than intellectual knowledge. When Master Gensho became too old to teach, He surprised everyone by naming May as his successor. The scholarly students were bewildered. She had never demonstrated vast knowledge or sophisticated understanding. She had barely spoken in all her years at the monastery. At the ceremony, one bold student asked, "Master May, you never asked questions like we did. You never engaged in the discussions and debates that we thought were so important. Why should you lead us?" May looked at the gathered students with gentle eyes. "You learned about Buddhism," she said quietly. "I learned Buddhism. There's a difference." She picked up a cup of water. If you're thirsty, and someone describes water to you in elaborate detail, explains its molecular structure, debates its philosophical significance, are you satisfied, or do you need to drink? She drank from the cup, then set it down. "For years you've been studying descriptions of water while remaining thirsty. I just drank. Not because I'm smarter or better, but because I stopped believing that understanding the description was the same as tasting the reality." She looked around at them all. "You can stay here and continue to ask questions if you wish. Questions are not wrong. Discussion is not wrong. But eventually, you might notice that the mind that asks endless questions is avoiding the practice that would make the questions unnecessary. Eventually, you might discover that some things can only be understood by direct experience, not by intellectual analysis." One student asked, "But how do we know if we're practicing correctly if we don't ask questions?" "Practice and watch what happens," May replied. "Are you kinder? Are you more patient? Are you suffering less? Is there more peace in your heart? These are not things you know by asking questions. These are things you know by looking honestly at your own experience." She stood to leave, then paused. "I'll tell you one more thing I learned by not asking questions. When your mind is quiet, when it's not constantly generating inquiries and debates and analysis, you can hear something deeper. You can hear the teaching that's always present, that doesn't need words, that comes from direct contact with reality itself. That's the teaching I chose to listen to." Tonight, as you rest, you might notice your own questioning mind. How many questions are running through your thoughts? Questions about tomorrow, about your life, about whether you're doing things right, about what it all means. What would happen if you let those questions rest for these hours of sleep? What if, instead of asking and analyzing and trying to figure everything out, you experience this moment directly? You don't need to understand everything to rest. You don't need to have all the answers to be at peace right now. Sometimes the wisest response to life's complexity is not another question, but a quiet presence. Not more analysis, but more direct experiencing. Not more words, but more silence in which to hear what words can never say. Let your questions burn themselves out tonight. Let your seeking mind rest. And in that rest, you might discover what May discovered. That direct experience often teaches what endless inquiry never can. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In a village garden, there lived a harmless snake that ate insects and kept the vegetable patch healthy. The gardener, an old man named Hideaki, appreciated the snake and would nod to it when he saw it sunning itself on stones or moving slowly through the rows of vegetables. The snake was small, no thicker than Hideaki's thumb. with gentle eyes and a pattern of brown and green scales that helped it blend with the garden soil. It had lived in the garden for several years, and Hideaki had watched it grow from a tiny hatchling to its current modest size. It was a completely harmless species, one that ate only insects and small slugs, never anything larger. The snake wanted nothing to do with humans and would quickly slither away if anyone approached too closely. But Hideaki's grandson, a boy named Kyo, who was 8 years old, was terrified of the snake. He had never been bitten, never been threatened, never had any negative encounter with it at all. But he had heard stories from other children about snakes being dangerous. His friend's older brother had told elaborate tales about venomous snakes that could kill a person with one bite. Another child had described snakes as evil creatures that attacked without warning. So every time Kyo caught a glimpse of the garden snake, he would run away screaming. His heart would race. His breath would come short and fast. His whole body would flood with terror. The sight of that small, harmless creature would send him into complete panic. Hideaki tried many times to reason with his grandson. "Kyo, this snake is harmless. See how small it is. Look at its gentle movements. It eats only insects. It helps our garden by keeping pests away. It wants nothing to do with humans. It's more afraid of you than you are of it." But Kyo wouldn't listen. His fear was too great, too consuming. The rational words his grandfather spoke couldn't penetrate the wall of terror that the very idea of the snake created in his mind. Logic had no power over the fear that gripped him. "But snakes are dangerous," Kyo would insist. "Everyone knows that. They bite people. They're scary. I don't want to go in the garden anymore." Hideaki was concerned. The boy's fear was keeping him from enjoying the garden, from helping with the vegetables, from the simple pleasure of being outdoors. The fear was limiting his life in ways that had nothing to do with actual danger. One late afternoon, Kyo was alone in the garden, sent by his mother to pick some tomatoes for dinner. He was moving carefully, nervously, constantly scanning the ground for any sign of the snake. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden path. Then he saw it. Something moving on the ground ahead of him. The shape was long and sinuous, definitely a snake. And this one was enormous, far larger than the small garden snake he had seen before. It must be a different snake, a dangerous one. The creature was at least as thick as his arm, maybe 6 or 7 feet long, moving slowly across the path. Terror seized Kyo completely. His legs locked. His breath stopped. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. He couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at this enormous serpent that was right in his path, blocking his way back to the house. The snake moved with a sinuous, menacing motion. Its body seemed to pulse and writhe. Kyo could see every detail of its threatening form, the dark color, the massive size, the way it seemed to be looking right at him, even though he couldn't see its head clearly. He stood there frozen, convinced he was about to be attacked, about to be bitten by this monster that had invaded his grandfather's garden. Minutes passed like hours. The snake continued its slow movement across the path, and Kyo remained paralyzed, watching it, unable to run or call for help. Finally, his grandfather came out of the house, having noticed that Kyo had been gone too long for such a simple errand. He found his grandson standing rigid with fear in the middle of the garden path, staring at the ground with eyes wide and face pale. "Kyo!" "What's wrong?" Hideaki called out, hurrying toward the boy. "A giant snake!" Kyo gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Right there! Look how huge it is! Grandfather, be careful!" Hideaki looked where his grandson was pointing. He saw the small garden snake, the same one that had lived there for years, sunning itself on the path, as it often did in the late afternoon. It was no bigger than it had ever been, perhaps 8 inches long, completely harmless. And nearby, stretching across the path in the low-angled light of the setting sun, he saw the snake's shadow. The shadow was indeed enormous, at least 6 feet long and thick, cast long and dark by the horizontal rays of the sun. The shadow looked menacing, serpentine, threatening. But it was just a shadow. Hideaki understood immediately what had happened. His grandson had seen the shadow and thought it was the snake, or thought it was a different, much larger snake. The boy's fear had locked onto the shadow and convinced him that he was seeing a genuine threat. "Kyo," Hideaki said gently, "come here. Come stand next to me." But Kyo couldn't move. "I can't. The snake is in the way. It's huge, grandfather. It's dangerous." "Trust me," Hideaki said, his voice calm and steady. "Take my hand. I promise you're safe." Slowly, with trembling steps, Kyo moved toward his grandfather, keeping his eyes on the enormous snake the entire time, certain it would strike at any moment. Hideaki took his grandson's hand and led him closer to where the small garden snake lay on the path. As they approached, something remarkable happened. The shadow shortened. The closer they got, the smaller the shadow became. By the time they stood right next to the actual snake, which quickly slithered away into the vegetables, startled by their approach, the shadow was appropriately small, no more threatening than the creature that cast it. Kyo stared at where the snake had been, then at where its shadow had stretched across the path. His breathing was still rapid, his heart still pounding, but confusion was beginning to replace terror. "The shadow," he whispered. I thought the shadow was the snake, or a different snake, a huge one." "I know," Hideaki said, kneeling down beside his grandson. "Come, let me show you something." He picked up a stick from the ground, about the same size as the garden snake. In the low afternoon sun, he held it at different angles, casting its shadow on the path. When he held it close to the ground, the shadow was small. But when he held it higher, angled toward the sun, the shadow grew enormous, stretching across the entire path. "See?" Hideaki said. "Any small thing can cast a large shadow under the right conditions. The shadow tells you nothing about the actual size or danger of the thing. It just tells you about the light and the angle and your position relative to it." Kyo watched, fascinated despite his lingering fear, as his grandfather made the stick's shadow grow and shrink, made it look threatening or harmless just by changing the angle. "The snake didn't change," Hideaki continued. "It was always small and harmless. But the shadow changed based on the light, and you saw the shadow and thought it was showing you the truth about the snake. But shadows can lie. Or rather, shadows can exaggerate. They can make something small look huge, something harmless look dangerous. He set down the stick and took both of Kyo's hands. This is what fear does, grandson. Fear is like that low sun. It casts everything in shadow, making it look bigger and more dangerous than it actually is. The snake didn't change. Your perception of it changed based on angle, light, and most importantly, based on your expectation of danger. Over the following days, Hideaki worked with Kyo to help him understand not just the snake's shadow, but the nature of fear itself. He showed him how fear distorts perception, how it takes small threats and makes them seem enormous, how it turns harmless things into monsters. They did experiments together. In the late afternoon, when the sun was low, they would put various objects on the path and observe their shadows. A small toy mouse cast a shadow that looked like a large rat. A thin branch cast a shadow that looked like a serpent. A butterfly landing on a stone cast a shadow that seemed to flutter and pulse menacingly. Everything looks more threatening in shadow, Hideaki explained. And fear puts everything in shadow. When you're afraid, your mind sees threats everywhere. It exaggerates the size of dangers. It interprets ambiguous things as dangerous. It casts everything in the worst possible light, just like this low sun casts everything in exaggerated shadow. Kyo was beginning to understand. So when I'm afraid, I see shadows instead of real things. Exactly, his grandfather said. The fear came first, from the stories you heard, from the ideas you had about snakes being dangerous. Then, because you were already afraid, when you saw something that could be a snake, your fear made it look as threatening as possible. The shadow confirmed what you already feared. But it wasn't showing you reality, it was showing you your fear. They began a daily practice. Each afternoon, when the shadows were long, Kyo would go into the garden with his grandfather. They would look for the snake, and when they found it, they would observe both the snake and its shadow. Kyo would practice seeing them as separate things, the actual snake, small and harmless, and the shadow, which could be large or small depending on the light and angle. Slowly, over weeks, Kyo's fear began to diminish. He learned to check his first perception. When something looked threatening, he would ask himself, am I seeing the thing itself, or am I seeing its shadow? Am I responding to actual danger, or to fear's distortion of reality? One day, Kyo was in the garden alone when he saw the snake. His first impulse was still fear, that instant clench of his heart, that flash of terror. But now, he had tools to work with that fear. He stopped, took a breath, and looked more carefully. The snake was small, as it had always been. It was moving slowly through the lettuce, eating small insects. Its shadow in the bright midday sun was tiny and non-threatening. There was nothing here to fear. The actual snake was harmless. The shadow his fear had been casting was the real threat. Kyo didn't run. He watched the snake for several minutes, observing its gentle movements, the way it went about its business without any attention to him. He felt his fear dissolving, replaced by curiosity, and even a kind of appreciation. This creature was part of the garden's ecosystem, helpful and harmless. When he told his grandfather about this encounter, Hideaki smiled with deep satisfaction. You've learned something that will serve you far beyond this garden, he said. You've learned to distinguish between actual threats and the shadows that fear casts. Most of what frightens us in life is shadows, not substance. As Kyo grew older, he found this lesson applied to many areas of his life. When he was worried about starting at a new school, he recognized that his fear was casting shadows, making the unknown seem more threatening than it actually was. When he was anxious about speaking in front of his class, he understood that his imagination was creating enormous shadows of embarrassment and failure that were far larger than any actual consequence. He learned to ask himself the questions his grandfather had taught him. What is the actual thing I'm afraid of? How big is it really? And how much of what I'm seeing is the shadow cast by my own fear? Years later, when Kyo was a young man, he returned to his grandfather's garden. The old snake had long since died, but its descendants still lived there, keeping the garden healthy. Kyo could watch them without fear, even appreciate their elegant movements and their important role in the garden's balance. A neighbor's child was visiting, a little girl who was terrified of the snakes. She screamed when she saw one, just as Kyo had done years before. And Kyo found himself repeating his grandfather's lesson, showing her how the afternoon sun cast long shadows, demonstrating how fear makes small things look huge. The shadow is not the thing, he told her, using the same words his grandfather had used with him. Your fear shows you shadows and tells you they're real. But if you look more carefully, if you change your angle, if you step closer, you'll see the actual thing is much smaller than its shadow suggests. He showed her the small snake, harmless and gentle, and then its exaggerated shadow in the late afternoon light. He helped her understand that she had been responding to the shadow of her own fear, not to any actual danger. Hideaki, now very old, watched this teaching being passed down and felt deep satisfaction. This was wisdom that could transform a life. The understanding that fear distorts perception, that we so often respond to shadows rather than reality, that most of what terrifies us is an exaggeration created by our own minds. One evening, Hideaki and Kyo sat together in the garden as the sun set, casting long shadows across everything. You know, Hideaki said, I've been thinking about this teaching we've shared, about snakes and shadows. It goes even deeper than I first realized. How so? Kyo asked. Well, we talk about how fear creates shadows that make things look bigger than they are. But there's another side to it. Sometimes we need to see our own shadows, the parts of ourselves we're afraid of or ashamed of. We spend so much energy trying to hide our shadows, pretending they don't exist, that we never really look at them. And anything we refuse to look at has power over us. He pointed to their own shadows, stretched long in the setting sun. Your shadow is part of you. You can't separate from it, but it's not you. It's just the outline you cast, the space you block from the light. The same is true of our inner shadows, our fears and flaws, and the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. They're part of us, but they're not all of us, and they only look monstrous when we refuse to look at them directly. Kyo thought about this. So, the lesson works both ways? Don't be afraid of shadows outside you because they're not as dangerous as they look. But also, don't be afraid of shadows inside you because they're just aspects of yourself, not monsters. Exactly, Hideaki said. Fear makes everything look worse than it is, whether it's a snake in the garden or a flaw in your own character. The solution is the same. Look directly at the thing itself, not at the shadow your fear is casting. When you look directly, with courage and honesty, you almost always find that the reality is more manageable than the shadow suggested. As night fell and the shadows merged into general darkness, Kyo reflected on all he had learned from one small garden snake and its shadow. The lesson had grown and deepened over the years, revealing new layers of meaning. What had started as a child's fear of a harmless creature had become a profound understanding about the nature of fear itself, about perception and reality, about how our minds create the very threats we're most afraid of. The garden snake, living its simple life among the vegetables, had been an unlikely teacher. But then Kyo had learned the best teachers often come in unexpected forms. Sometimes wisdom arrives not through grand revelations, but through small moments of noticing, through paying attention to shadows and light, through an old grandfather's patient guidance, and a child's eventual willingness to look more closely at what he feared. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what shadows you've been seeing. What fears in your life are casting exaggerated shadows, making things seem more threatening than they actually are? What worries have you been responding to as if they were huge and dangerous, when they might be quite small if you looked at them directly? Fear has a way of taking the unknown, the uncertain, the potentially difficult, and casting it in the worst possible light. Every ambiguous situation becomes threatening. Every challenge looks insurmountable. Every risk seems catastrophic. But these are shadows, distortions created by the angle of your perception and the intensity of your fear. What if you could see your fears in bright midday light instead of the exaggerated shadows of anxiety? What if you stepped closer to examine them, the way Kyo learned to approach the snake instead of running from it? You might find that the actual thing is much smaller, much less threatening than the shadow suggested. And what about the shadows within you? The parts of yourself you judge harshly, the flaws you try to hide, the aspects of your personality or your history that you're ashamed of. These cast shadows too. They look monstrous when you refuse to look at them, when you let fear tell you how terrible they are. But when you turn toward them with courage, when you examine them directly instead of avoiding them, you often find they're just human, just part of being alive. Just aspects of yourself that need acknowledgement, not judgment. Rest now in the understanding that most of what frightens you is shadow, not substance. Your fears are real, yes, but what you fear is often an exaggeration, a distortion, an illusion created by poor lighting and unfortunate angles. The actual challenges you face are manageable. The real you beneath all the shadows is capable and whole. The darkness you're afraid of is just the absence of light, and light returns with each morning. Let your fears cast their shadows if they must. You don't have to fight them or deny them. Just recognize them for what they are, shadows, not the things themselves, and know that shadows, no matter how large or dark or menacing they appear, cannot hurt you. They're just shapes in the absence of light. They have no substance. They cannot touch you. Sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that the monsters are shadows, and the shadows will shrink when you bring them into the light of honest attention. You are not your fears. You are not the shadows those fears cast. You are the awareness that can see both the thing and its shadow, that can distinguish between actual danger and exaggerated perception, that can step closer and discover again and again that what looked huge from a distance is quite small up close. Rest in this truth. The garden snake is just a small creature that eats insects. The shadow was just a shadow. And you are safe. You've always been safe. The threat was never as large as it looked. It never is. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In an ancient temple, there lived a cat named Tama, who seemed to do nothing but sleep in the sun. While monks meditated, Tama napped. While monks worked, Tama lounged. While monks studied, Tama groomed herself lazily. To visitors, the cat appeared to be a freeloader, enjoying the temple's hospitality while contributing nothing. A new abbot arrived at the temple, a young man named Ryokan, who believed in efficiency and purpose. He was troubled by the cat's apparent uselessness. "That cat does nothing," he complained to the senior monks. "She just sleeps and eats. Why do we keep her?" The senior monks smiled but said nothing. They had learned long ago that Tama's purpose wasn't obvious to everyone immediately. Ryokan decided the cat had to earn her keep. He began assigning her duties: chase mice in the storage rooms, patrol the gardens for pests, anything productive. But Tama ignored these assignments. She continued her routine of sleeping in sunny spots, occasionally stretching, maintaining her serene presence. Frustrated, Ryokan announced his intention to find the cat a new home. "We cannot justify feeding an animal that serves no purpose." That very night, as if to prove his point, mice invaded the temple's grain storage. Ryokan rushed to wake the cat, to put her to work catching these pests. But he couldn't find her. She wasn't in any of her usual sleeping spots. Then he heard it. A soft, steady purring coming from the storage room. He opened the door and found Tama sitting perfectly still in the center of the room. She wasn't chasing mice. She wasn't even moving. She was just sitting, present, alert, purring quietly. And there were no mice in the room. Ryokan could hear them in the walls, could hear them trying to enter, but none crossed the threshold where Tama sat. Her mere presence, her calm watchfulness, was keeping them at bay. She didn't need to chase them. She didn't need to kill them. She just needed to be there. Ryokan watched for over an hour. Tama never moved, never broke her meditation. She was like a guardian statue, her presence creating a boundary that mice instinctively wouldn't cross. Finally, as dawn approached, she stood, stretched, and calmly walked out of the storage room, heading for her favorite sunny spot. The senior monks found Ryokan standing in wonder. "She does have a purpose," he said quietly. "Yes," one of the senior monks replied, "but not the purpose you imagined. You wanted her to chase and hunt. You wanted visible action, measurable productivity. But Tama's gift is presence. She protects through being, not through doing. The mice sense a predator and stay away. She doesn't have to work hard. She just has to be what she is." Another monk added, "We tried to train cats before Tama. Cats that were energetic hunters, always chasing, always catching. But they disturbed the temple's peace. They left dead mice everywhere. They were exhausting to live with. Tama protects quietly. peacefully, just by being present. Her seeming laziness is actually perfect efficiency. Ryokan bowed to the cat, who had settled into a patch of morning sun and was already falling asleep. Forgive me, Tama. I judged your worth by my standards instead of understanding your actual purpose. From that day forward, Ryokan looked at everything in the temple differently. The old plum tree that no longer bore fruit he had planned to cut down. But the monks showed him how its branches were perfect for birds to nest in, how its shade cooled the meditation hall on summer days, how its twisted trunk was beautiful in a way that useful, productive trees never were. Its purpose wasn't production, its purpose was beauty and shelter. The ancient bell that was cracked and no longer rang clearly, he wanted to replace. But the monks explained that its imperfect tone was beloved, that its crack created a unique sound found nowhere else, and that generations of monks had learned to meditate to this particular tone. Its flaw was actually its distinction. The novice monk who seemed slow at learning, whom Ryokan had considered asking to leave, turned out to be extraordinarily patient with visitors, able to sit with grieving people for hours without becoming uncomfortable. His slowness at intellectual tasks was balanced by his gift for compassionate presence. I've been judging everything by a narrow standard, Ryokan confessed to the senior monks. Productivity, efficiency, obvious usefulness, but the temple isn't a business, it's an ecosystem. Everything has its place, its purpose, even if that purpose isn't immediately obvious or doesn't fit conventional measures of value. He spent hours watching Tama, learning from her. She seemed to do nothing, yet her presence maintained order. She appeared lazy, yet she was perfectly alert when needed. She looked like a burden, yet she contributed essential value. She taught that being can be as important as doing, that presence can accomplish what action cannot, that some purposes are served by appearing purposeless. One day, a wealthy donor visited the temple and was offended to see a cat sleeping on expensive cushions in the main hall. "Why do you allow this animal such privilege? She produces nothing." Ryokan smiled and told the story of Tama and the mice. She produces protection through presence. She contributes peace through her serene being. Her value can't be measured in conventional terms, but it's real and essential. She teaches us that purpose isn't always about production or visible action. Sometimes purpose is about simply being what you are, fully and completely in the right place. The donor looked skeptical, so Ryokan continued. "You're a wealthy merchant. You measure value in terms of production, profit, and tangible results, but not everything valuable can be measured that way. How do you measure the worth of beauty, of peace, of a presence that prevents problems rather than solving them? Tama's purpose is subtle but essential. Without her, we would have chaos. With her, we have order. That she achieves this through napping rather than through frantic activity doesn't diminish her contribution." Years passed, and eventually Tama grew old and died. The monks gave her a funeral with full honors, acknowledging her years of service. They tried to find another cat to serve her function, but none could quite match her particular gift. Some cats were too aggressive, chasing everything and disturbing the peace. Others were too passive, failing to maintain the protective presence that Tama had embodied. Finally, they found a cat with Tama's quality, a calm, serene presence that protected through being rather than doing. This cat they named Tama II, and she took up residence in the sunny spots her predecessor had loved, continuing the tradition of purposeful purposelessness. Ryokan, now an old man himself, would often sit with the new Tama and remember the lessons the original had taught him. Every being has its place in the whole, he would tell young monks, but that place might not look like what we expect. Purpose isn't always about obvious productivity. Sometimes it's about being present, being yourself, contributing in ways that aren't measurable but are nonetheless essential. He would point to the sleeping cat. Tama teaches us not to judge too quickly, not to assess worth by narrow standards, not to dismiss what we don't immediately understand. She teaches us that the temple, like all of life, is an ecosystem where even the apparently useless serves a purpose, where presence matters as much as action, where being is as valuable as doing. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own purpose. Perhaps you've been judging yourself by standards that don't fit what you actually are. Perhaps you've been trying to be productive in ways that go against your nature. Perhaps you've been dismissing your own value because it doesn't fit conventional measures. What if your purpose, like Tama's, is partly about presence, about being what you are, where you are, contributing value that isn't always visible or measurable? What if your times of rest, of apparent inactivity, of just being present, are actually serving important purposes that busy productivity never could? You don't have to chase and hunt and constantly produce to have worth. Sometimes protection comes through peaceful presence. Sometimes order is maintained through calm being. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is rest completely, be present fully, and trust that your very existence contributes to the whole in ways you may never fully understand. Sleep now like Tama, knowing that even in sleeping, you serve a purpose. There was a master calligrapher named Yukiko who had devoted her entire life to the art of beautiful writing. For 60 years, she had practiced daily, creating works that were displayed in temples and palaces throughout the land. Her characters were considered the finest of her generation. But as she grew old, her hands began to shake. The tremor was slight at first, barely noticeable, but gradually it worsened, until she could no longer create the smooth flowing lines that had been her signature. The characters she wrote became jagged, uneven, broken by the involuntary movements of her aging hands. Yukiko was devastated. Calligraphy was not just her work, it was her identity, her life's purpose. She had defined herself through her art for 60 years. Now, unable to produce the quality of work she had maintained for decades, she felt her life was over. If she couldn't create beautiful calligraphy, what was she? She stopped taking commissions. She stopped teaching students. She sat in her studio, staring at blank paper, unable to bring herself to create imperfect work. Each day felt like waiting for death, as if her life had ended, even though her body continued. One day, a young calligrapher named Kenji came to visit her. He had studied her work and wanted to meet her before she died, as he had heard she was no longer creating. "Master Yukiko," he said, bowing deeply, "please, will you show me how you create such beautiful work?" "I can't," Yukiko replied bitterly. "My hands shake. I can no longer do what I once did." My time is over. Show me anyway, Kenji persisted. Show me what you do now, even if it's not what you once did. Reluctantly, to satisfy this persistent young man, Yukiko took up her brush. Her hand trembled as she moved it across the paper. The line broke and wavered. The character she was forming looked nothing like the smooth, perfect characters she had created for 60 years. But Kenji was staring at it with wonder. This is extraordinary. It's broken, Yukiko said. It's everything I spent my life learning not to do. It's alive, Kenji replied. Your old work was perfect, but this has something your perfect work didn't have. It has a vulnerability. It has humanity. It shows the reality of the hand that made it, the tremor that comes with age, the imperfection that comes with being human. It's no less beautiful. It's beautiful in a different way. He pointed to specific places where the line broke. See how this break creates a pause, a breath? See how this wobble adds energy, movement. You couldn't create these effects intentionally. They come from not being able to control everything, from allowing the reality of your condition to show. Yukiko looked at her shaky calligraphy with new eyes. She had been seeing only what it wasn't: smooth, controlled, perfect. She hadn't been seeing what it was: authentic, immediate, marked by the truth of her aging body. You're saying my shaking hands aren't ending my art? She asked. They're changing it. They're revealing a new possibility, Kenji said. You've mastered perfection. You spent 60 years learning complete control. Now you're learning something else. How to create beauty without control. How to let your limitations become part of your art rather than obstacles to it. This isn't an ending. This is a beginning. Over the following months, Yukiko began to explore what Kenji had called a beginning. She stopped trying to fight against her tremor and started working with it. She let the shakiness show, let the broken lines be part of the aesthetic. Let her aging hands tell their own truth. The work she created was unlike anything she had done before. It had a raw quality, an honesty, a profound beauty that came from acceptance rather than mastery. People who saw it were moved in ways they couldn't quite explain. It touched something in them that perfect calligraphy never had. Your new work feels more human, one viewer said. The perfection was impressive, but this is relatable. This shows struggle and acceptance. This shows life as it actually is, not as we wish it to be. Other aging artists heard about Yukiko's transformation and came to see her. They too had been treating their declining abilities as endings, as tragedies that marked the end of their creative lives. Yukiko showed them something different. What you call an ending is just a transition, she told a painter whose eyesight was failing. You've lost what you had, yes, but loss creates space for something new. If you spend all your time mourning what's gone, you'll never discover what's trying to arrive. She showed them her shaky calligraphy. These tremors would have horrified me 5 years ago. I would have hidden this work in shame, but I've learned that every ending contains a beginning. My hand's steady control had to end before I could begin learning to create beauty from their unsteady truth. A sculptor whose arthritis had made detailed work impossible asked, "But how do you accept the loss? How do you stop grieving what you can no longer do?" "I still grieve it sometimes," Yukiko admitted. I still miss the feeling of complete control, the satisfaction of executing exactly what I envisioned. But I've discovered something. The part of me that created perfect calligraphy was actually quite limited. It could only create what I consciously intended. Now, with my shaking hands, I create things I never could have planned. The imperfection introduces an element beyond my control, and that element often produces more interesting results than my intentions ever did. She held up a piece of her new work. See this character? I intended it to look one way. My tremor made it look another way. And the way it actually looks is more compelling than what I planned. The beginning I'm in now includes accident, chance, collaboration with my body's wisdom, rather than domination of it. Kenji, who continued to visit Yukiko regularly, said, "You've become a better artist by becoming worse at control. Your mastery now includes accepting what you can't master. That's a higher skill than perfect technique ever was." Yukiko nodded. When I had complete control, I could only create versions of what I already knew. Now, with partial control, I'm discovering things I didn't know were possible. The ending of my old art was the beginning of art I couldn't have created any other way. A Zen master who collected calligraphy commissioned a piece from Yukiko. When she delivered it, with all its shaky lines and broken strokes, he hung it in his meditation hall's place of honor. "This shows the essence of Zen," he told his students. "Perfection is static, fixed, dead. This work is dynamic, alive, accepting of change and impermanence." The master's tremor isn't a flaw in the work. It's the work teaching its deepest truth. That beauty includes imperfection. The endings contain beginnings. That loss creates space for discovery. Yukiko lived another 15 years, creating what many considered her finest work during this period. Critics called her late-style revolutionary, noting how it had influenced a generation of younger artists to embrace imperfection and vulnerability in their work. When she finally died at 85, still creating tremor-marked calligraphy to the end, her students gathered to remember her. They spoke of her two periods, the 60 years of perfect control and the 15 years of acknowledged tremor. "Which period was greater?" a young student asked. An older student replied, "She was always great." But she became wise only in her second period, when she learned that endings contain beginnings. When she discovered that what you lose forces you to find what you didn't know was there. When she understood that every door that closes reveals another door you weren't seeing before. Tonight, as you rest, what endings are you mourning? What losses are you treating as pure conclusions with nothing beyond them? What abilities, relationships, or circumstances have ended that you're grieving, as if ending means death rather than transition? Every ending contains a beginning you can't see yet. The closing of one possibility opens others that couldn't have opened if the first possibility had continued. Your losses aren't just subtractions. They're also additions of space, of new potential, of directions you couldn't have gone while the old way remained available. What's ending in you right now isn't your conclusion, it's your transition. Something is completing, so something else can begin. The tremor that seems to be ruining your perfect lines is actually creating new kinds of beauty you couldn't have achieved through control alone. Rest now in acceptance of endings as beginnings in disguise. What's leaving is making room. What's breaking is revealing. What's ending is beginning, just not in ways you can recognize yet. Trust the ending. It knows what it's doing. Every conclusion contains a hidden opening, and you're moving toward it even as you mourn what's closing behind you. Sleep now in the space between ending and beginning, knowing that this space itself is fertile ground where something unexpected and beautiful is already starting to grow. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. There was a young man named Koji whose father had died, leaving substantial debts. The creditors came to Koji expecting him to assume responsibility for his father's obligations. Koji, believing this was his duty as the son, worked himself nearly to death trying to repay the money his father had borrowed. For 3 years, Koji labored from dawn to dusk. He took multiple jobs, spent almost nothing on himself, and sent every coin he earned to his father's creditors. His health suffered. His youth was consumed by obligation. He became bitter and resentful, angry at his father for leaving him this burden. A traveling monk named Bankei came to the town and noticed Koji's exhaustion. He asked the young man why he looked so worn. "I'm repaying my father's debts," Koji explained. "He died owing money, and as his son, the responsibility falls to me." "Did you borrow this money?" Bankei asked. "No, my father did." "Did you receive any benefit from what the money purchased?" "No, he borrowed it for his gambling and drinking." "Then why are you repaying it?" Koji looked at the monk in confusion. "Because I'm his son. Because the creditors say I must. Because it's my duty." Bankei shook his head gently. "You can choose to repay debts that aren't yours. That's your choice, but understand that you're choosing it, not that you must do it. Your father's choices were his own. His debts were his own. They died with him. The creditors may pressure you. Society may tell you it's your obligation, but actually you're free. You've been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry." Koji felt anger rise in him. "So I should just abandon my father's debts? That would dishonor his memory." "Is working yourself to death to pay for his gambling honoring his memory?" Bankei asked quietly. "Or is it perpetuating the harm he caused? Your father made choices that hurt himself and others. You don't honor him by destroying yourself for those choices. You honor him by living differently, by not continuing the cycle of harm." This conversation shook something loose in Koji. He had never questioned the assumption that his father's debts were now his. Everyone had told him this was his duty, and he had accepted it without examination. He began asking questions. Legally, were his father's debts actually his responsibility? He discovered they were not. The creditors had relied on his sense of filial duty and his ignorance of his legal rights. He had been free all along, but hadn't known it. Koji stopped making payments on his father's debts. The creditors threatened and complained, but they had no legal claim on him. He used his labor now to build his own life, to recover his health, to create a future not defined by his father's mistakes. Some people in the village criticized him. "He abandoned his father's debts," they whispered. "He has no filial piety." But Bankei, before leaving town, gave Koji final words of wisdom. Carrying debts that aren't yours doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you a volunteer victim. Your father's poor choices created consequences. Those consequences were his to face, not yours to inherit. You can feel compassion for him without taking on burdens that aren't yours. You can love someone without destroying yourself for their mistakes. Years later, when Koji had built a successful life and even helped others in his community who were struggling, someone asked him, "Don't you feel guilty for not repaying your father's debts?" "No," Koji replied. "I felt guilty for years while I was killing myself trying to repay them. But the guilt was about other people's expectations, not about actual obligation. My father's debts were his own. His choices were his own. I honor his memory better by living well and helping others than I would by destroying myself for mistakes I didn't make." Tonight, what debts are you carrying that were never yours? What burdens did you inherit from parents, from past relationships, from circumstances beyond your control? What shame or obligation have you assumed just because someone told you that you must? You're allowed to put these down. You're allowed to say, "This was never mine to carry." The debts of others, the mistakes of the past, the expectations of people who had no right to place them on you. None of these are truly yours, unless you choose to make them so. Rest tonight in freedom from all inherited burdens. You're responsible for your own choices, not for everyone else's. Let the dead bury the dead. Let old debts stay where they belong. You're free. In a forest where many birds lived, there was one small brown bird that behaved strangely. While all the other birds worked hard building nests, gathering twigs and moss and feathers, creating elaborate homes in preparation for different seasons, this bird built nothing. She would sleep one night in the hollow of a tree, the next night in thick bushes, the next night on a sheltered branch. The other birds gossiped about her. "She's lazy," some said. "She's foolish," others claimed. "Winter will come, or the rainy season, and she'll have no shelter. She'll regret her lack of planning." The brown bird heard these comments but continued her way of living. Each evening, she would look for where to sleep, finding whatever natural shelter was available. Each morning, she would wake, eat, sing, and fly, unburdened by the need to return to any particular place. One spring, a terrible storm came through the forest. The wind howled for 3 days. Trees bent and branches broke. Many carefully built nests were destroyed, torn apart by wind or crushed by falling limbs. Birds who had spent weeks constructing elaborate homes watched them disintegrate in hours. After the storm, the forest was full of distressed birds, mourning their lost nests, wondering how they would rebuild, and feeling that their security had been destroyed. But the brown bird was untroubled. The hollow tree where she had slept the night before the storm was now filled with water, so she simply found a dry hollow in a different tree. The bushes she had used the previous week were flattened, so she used different bushes. Her lack of attachment to any particular shelter meant she had lost nothing in the storm. A wise old owl, who had also lost his nest to the storm, noticed this. He approached the brown bird one morning. "I've watched you for years," the owl said, "and I always thought you were improvident, failing to plan for the future. But now I see something different. You have a kind of security that those of us with nests don't have." "What do you mean?" the bird asked. "Our security depends on things," the owl explained. "On nests, on accumulated materials, on particular places. When those things are destroyed, we feel our security is destroyed. But your security doesn't depend on anything or any place. It depends on your ability to find shelter wherever you are. That can't be destroyed by a storm. The bird tilted her head thoughtfully. I never thought about it that way. I just go where the shelter is. If one place doesn't work, I find another place. It seems simple. It is simple, the owl agreed. But it requires something that's actually quite difficult, letting go of attachment to any particular place or thing. Most of us can't do that. We want the security of returning to the same nest, the same tree, the same familiar place. We want to own a piece of the forest. You're content to belong to the whole forest without owning any of it. Over the following weeks, as birds worked to rebuild their nests, some began to notice what the owl had noticed. The brown bird was never without shelter, never anxious about losing her home, never burdened by protecting what she had accumulated. She had a lightness that the nest-building birds lacked. A young bird who was exhausted from gathering materials for her third attempt at building a nest that kept falling apart, asked the brown bird, "Don't you ever want a nest of your own? A place that's yours, that you can return to?" "I have the whole forest," the brown bird replied. "Every hollow tree, every sheltered branch, every thick bush, all of it is available to me. If I claimed one spot as mine, I would have less, not more. I would have one nest instead of countless possibilities." "But what about security?" the young bird persisted. "What about having something solid and permanent?" The brown bird looked at the young bird's partially built nest, already showing signs of the same structural problems that had doomed the previous two attempts. "Is your nest permanent?" The storm showed us that nothing we build lasts forever. Everything changes. The tree that's perfect today might fall tomorrow. The branch that seems strong might break. If your security depends on things staying the same, you'll always be afraid. She ruffled her feathers and continued, "My security comes from knowing I can adapt. I can find shelter in many places. I can adjust to changing conditions. I don't need things to stay the same to be okay. That's a kind of security that storms can't destroy." A monk who lived near the forest and fed the birds sometimes would observe them. He heard other humans talk about the brown bird, calling her the foolish one who didn't plan. But he saw something different. "That bird understands Wu Wei," he told visitors. "She flows with circumstances instead of trying to control them. She works with what is instead of clinging to what was. The other birds work very hard to create security, but their security is brittle because it depends on things staying the same. Her security is flexible because it depends on her ability to work with change." He would point to human lives too. We're like the nest-building birds. We accumulate possessions, thinking they'll make us secure. We cling to jobs, relationships, identities, thinking that if we can just keep things from changing, we'll be safe. But everything changes. The storm always comes eventually. And when it does, all that accumulated security can vanish in a day. People would ask him, "So should we not plan? Not build, not try to create stability?" "Build if you want to build," he would reply. "Plan if you want to plan. But hold it all lightly. Don't let your security depend on things remaining unchanged. Develop the brown bird's skill, the ability to find shelter in new circumstances, to adapt to change, to let go of what's gone and work with what's here. That's real security, not having a nest, having the ability to live without one. Some listeners understood this teaching. They began to hold their possessions more lightly, to see their homes as temporary shelters rather than permanent fortresses, to develop skills and relationships and inner resources that could adapt to changing circumstances rather than relying on things staying the same. Others couldn't hear it. They kept building bigger nests, acquiring more stuff, trying to make themselves so secure that change couldn't touch them. And then they would suffer greatly when the inevitable storms came. The brown bird lived many years in her nestless way. When she finally died, peacefully in a hollow log during a quiet night, the forest birds gathered to remember her. Even the birds who had once mocked her improvidence now spoke of her with respect. "She taught us something important," the old owl said. "That true security doesn't come from having much, but from needing little. Not from keeping things the same, but from flowing with change. Not from attachment to place, but from being at home everywhere." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own nests. What are you clinging to, thinking it will keep you secure? What are you afraid to lose, believing that losing it would destroy your safety? What if real security came not from accumulating and protecting, but from developing the ability to adapt, to let go, to find shelter in new circumstances? You don't need to own peace to experience it. You don't need to build happiness to feel it. You don't need to nest in any particular circumstance to be okay. Like the brown bird, you can be at home in the whole forest of life, finding rest wherever you are, secure not in things staying the same, but in your to flow with whatever comes. Let go of your nest tonight. You don't need it to rest. The whole forest is yours. Every moment offers shelter if you're not too attached to the shelter of the previous moment. Rest in change. Rest in uncertainty. Rest in the knowing that you can adapt, can find what you need, can be okay without controlling everything. That's real security. And it's lighter than any nest could ever be. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In a mountain monastery lived an old abbess named Ren, who kept in her private chamber an unusual mirror. The mirror was ancient, its surface darkened and worn until it reflected almost nothing. Visitors who saw it would often remark on its uselessness. "Your mirror shows nothing," they would say. "Why keep it? Get a new one that actually works." But Ren treasured this mirror and looked into it every morning. "It shows me exactly what I need to see," she would reply, though she never explained what she meant. One day, a vain young woman named Ayame came to the monastery seeking spiritual guidance. She was beautiful and knew it, spending hours each day on her appearance, constantly checking her reflection in every available surface. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her looks. During her first meeting with Ren, Ayame couldn't stop glancing at the darkened mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of herself. But the mirror showed nothing, just a dark, murky surface with barely a hint of reflection. "Your mirror is broken," Ayame said with annoyance. "Don't you want to see yourself?" "I see myself perfectly well in this mirror," Ren replied. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's too dark." "Exactly," Ren said and smiled. Ayami didn't understand, but as the days passed and she continued her stay at the monastery, she found herself repeatedly drawn to Ren's useless mirror. She would stand before it, searching for her reflection, finding almost nothing. It was deeply unsettling. Every other mirror showed her who she was, or at least showed her what she looked like. This mirror showed nothing. After a week, Ayami mentioned her frustration to Ren. "I hate your mirror. I keep looking into it hoping to see myself, but there's nothing there." "And what does that nothing teach you?" Ren asked. "That the mirror is broken." "Or that you're looking for the wrong thing," Ren suggested. "Every mirror you've ever looked into has shown you your face, your hair, your features. You've spent years studying that reflection, knowing exactly what you look like. My mirror can't show you that, so it forces you to consider, if you can't see your face, what else might you see? If appearance isn't available, what remains?" Ayami thought about this. When she looked into normal mirrors, she saw features she judged. Eyes too small, nose too sharp, skin not smooth enough. She saw an image she tried to perfect, control, improve. The looking was never really seeing. It was evaluating, criticizing, trying to manage how others would perceive her. But in Ren's dark mirror, there was nothing to evaluate, no features to judge, no appearance to control. Just dark surface and, if she looked very carefully, the barest hint of a form. Not details, just presence. "What do you see when you look in your mirror?" Ayami asked Ren. "Nothing that can be improved or criticized," Ren replied. "Nothing that age can diminish or beauty can enhance. Just the simple fact of being here, looking. The mirror that shows everything tempts you to judge what you see. The mirror that shows nothing releases you from judgment." She came to stand beside Ayame before the dark mirror. "Look at us now, standing here together. Can you see our faces?" "Barely," Ayame admitted. "Can you tell which of us is more beautiful?" "No." "Can you see our ages, our features, the details that usually define us?" "No." "Then we stand equal before this mirror," Ren said. "Not as beautiful or plain, young or old, but simply as two beings, present in this moment. The mirror that shows nothing strips away all the superficial ways we distinguish ourselves and leaves only the essential fact: we are here." Over the following weeks, Ayame found herself looking into Ren's mirror more than any of the clear mirrors in the monastery. At first, this puzzled her. Why would she choose the mirror that showed nothing? But gradually she understood. She was tired of the constant judgment that came with seeing her reflection clearly. Tired of always evaluating, always trying to improve, always wondering if she looked acceptable. The dark mirror gave her relief from all that. It let her be present without being perceived, even by herself. It let her exist without the burden of appearance. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Ayame told Ren one morning. "The mirror that shows nothing is actually showing me something very important. That I exist independent of how I look. That there's a me underneath or beyond appearance. I've spent so many years focused on my reflection that I forgot there's someone doing the looking." Ren nodded with satisfaction. "The mirror that shows everything directs your attention outward, to surface and appearance. The mirror that shows nothing directs your attention inward, to the awareness that's looking. One mirror shows you an object to be evaluated. The other mirror reveals you as a subject who is aware. She touched the darkened surface gently. Most people think a mirror's value is in how clearly it reflects. But sometimes a mirror's greatest value is in what it doesn't show. The absence of reflection can teach what the presence of reflection never could. Ayame stayed at the monastery for 6 months, and during that time, her relationship with mirrors changed completely. She no longer felt compelled to check her reflection constantly. When she did look in clear mirrors, she no longer saw an image to be judged, but simply a face, no more or less significant than any other face. "Your dark mirror freed me," she told Ren when she prepared to leave. "I thought I needed to see myself clearly to know who I was, but actually, seeing myself clearly kept me trapped in appearance, in judgment, in the endless work of managing how I looked. Your mirror that showed nothing helped me discover the me that exists beyond appearance." After Ayame left, other students asked Ren about the mirror's teaching. "Why not just remove all mirrors?" one asked. "If the point is to free people from attachment to appearance, why have mirrors at all?" "Because running from mirrors is still being controlled by them," Ren explained. "The person who avoids all mirrors is as attached to appearance as the person who constantly looks. They're just attached to not looking rather than to looking. The dark mirror teaches something different. It teaches how to look without judgment, how to be aware of appearance without being enslaved by it." She held up the darkened mirror for the students to see. "This mirror shows that appearance and essence are not the same. The clear mirror shows you appearance so clearly that you might mistake it for essence. This dark mirror removes appearance and asks, what remains? What are you when you can't see your face? That question leads to wisdom." A philosophical student asked, "But isn't the dark mirror just another form of illusion? It hides reality rather than revealing it." "Does it?" Ren replied. "The clear mirror shows you how light reflects off your features at this particular moment from this particular angle. Is that reality? Or is that also just one kind of information, one kind of seeing? The dark mirror shows you something the clear mirror can't. Your existence independent of your reflection. Both mirrors have their uses. The question is whether you're wise enough to learn from each what it has to teach." Years later, when Ren was dying, she gave the darkened mirror to her successor with specific instructions. "Keep this mirror even though students will mock it, even though visitors will offer to replace it. This mirror teaches what cannot be taught in words, that sometimes absence reveals more than presence, that sometimes nothing shows more than everything, that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from what we cannot see rather than from what we can." Tonight, as you rest, you might imagine looking into a mirror that shows nothing, not because the mirror is broken, but because it's teaching you something that clear mirrors never could. Without your reflection to evaluate and judge, what remains? Without your appearance to manage and improve, who are you? The mirror that shows nothing is inviting you to meet yourself beyond surface, beyond image, beyond all the ways you've learned to see yourself through others' eyes. In the dark mirror, there's just presence, just awareness, just the simple fact of being here without needing to look any particular way. Rest now in the dark mirror's teaching. Let yourself be unseen, unreflected, undefined by appearance. Let yourself exist in the space beyond image, where judgment can't reach, where evaluation has no meaning, where you simply are without needing to be any particular way. The mirror shows nothing, and in that nothing, everything essential is revealed. Sleep in that revelation tonight. In a village where strong winds frequently blew down from the mountains, there was a grove of trees that included many different species. There were tall, rigid pines that stood straight and proud. There were sturdy oaks with thick trunks and strong branches. And among these impressive trees, there grew a single weeping willow, whose branches hung down gracefully, swaying with every breeze. A young carpenter named Riku would come to this grove to select wood for his work. He admired the strong, straight pines and the solid oaks. These were trees that stood firm against the wind, that didn't bend or yield, that maintained their position no matter what the weather came. This, Riku thought, was what strength looked like. The weeping willow he barely noticed, and when he did, he pitied it. Its branches drooped instead of reaching proudly skyward. It swayed and bent with every wind. It seemed weak, yielding, almost pathetic compared to the strong trees around it. Then one year, a great storm came. The wind howled down from the mountains with unprecedented force. The rain fell in sheets. Lightning split the sky. For 3 days and 3 nights, the storm raged. When it finally passed, Riku went to the grove to see what wood might be available from fallen trees. What he found shocked him. The strong pines, so tall and proud, had snapped like twigs. Their rigid trunks had broken under the force of the wind. The sturdy oaks had been uprooted, their strong but inflexible branches torn away. All across the grove lay the wreckage of trees that had stood firm, refused to yield, and had been destroyed for their rigidity. But the weeping willow still stood. Its branches, which had seemed so weak because they bent and swayed, had flexed with the wind rather than breaking against it. The tree that had appeared most fragile had survived when all the apparently strong trees had fallen. Riku sat beside the willow, looking at the destruction around it, trying to understand what he was seeing. Everything he thought he knew about strength was being challenged. The rig had broken. The yielding had survived. An old Buddhist nun named Kei was walking through the grove, surveying the damage from the storm. She saw Riku sitting in confusion and joined him. "The storm taught you something," she said. "I don't understand," Riku replied. "The strong trees broke. The weak ones survived. How can that be?" "You're confusing rigidity with strength," Kei said gently, "and flexibility with weakness. These are not the same things." She touched one of the willow's drooping branches. "This tree looks weak because it bends, but bending is what saved it." The rigid trees fought against the wind, trying to stand firm, refusing to yield. And the wind broke them. The willow didn't fight. It bent with the wind, yielded to forces it couldn't resist, and in that yielding, found the strength to survive. Riku listened carefully as Kei continued. "There's a principle in martial arts called Ju, which means gentleness or flexibility. The idea is that you don't meet force with force. You don't try to be harder than what's hitting you. Instead, you yield. You move with the energy coming at you. You redirect it rather than blocking it. This isn't a weakness. It's a different kind of strength." She gestured to the broken pines. These trees were strong in one way, but their strength was brittle. They could stand firm against normal winds, but when a force greater than their resistance came, they broke. The willow's strength is different. It has no brittleness because it has no rigidity. It can't break because it never stops bending. Over the following weeks, Riku began to see this principle everywhere. He watched how water, soft and yielding, could wear away stone over time. He noticed how the most rigid people in the village were often the most fragile when things didn't go their way. He observed how the people who could adapt and bend were often the ones who survived life's storms most intact. He changed his approach to carpentry. Instead of always seeking the hardest, most rigid woods, he began to appreciate woods with some flexibility, some give. He learned to work with the wood's natural tendencies rather than trying to force it into shapes it didn't want to take. His furniture became known for being both strong and graceful, able to bear weight while having a quality of flow and ease. But the deeper lesson was about how he lived his own life. Riku had always prided himself on being firm in his opinions, rigid in his principles, unwavering in his positions. He thought this made him strong, but he began to realize it made him brittle. When his wife suggested a different approach to something, his first instinct had always been to resist, to stand firm in his original idea. Now he began to consider, what if yielding wasn't losing? What if listening and adjusting weren't weaknesses but wisdom? When a client wanted changes to a piece he was building, instead of rigidly defending his design, he would flex, adapt, and incorporate their ideas. Often, the result was better than what he had planned. His yielding led to better outcomes than his resistance ever had. When life didn't go according to his plans, instead of fighting against reality, insisting things should be different, he began to bend with what was happening, to adapt, to find ways to work with circumstances rather than against them. A young man from the village came to Riku seeking advice. Everyone tells me I need to be strong, to stand firm, to never back down, but I don't feel strong when I do that. I feel brittle, like I'm about to break. Riku took him to see the weeping willow. The tree had grown even larger in the years since the storm, its graceful branches now spreading wide. This tree survived a storm that destroyed every tree around it, Riku said, not because it was harder or more rigid, but because it knew how to yield. Look at how it moves with this breeze. It doesn't fight the wind, it dances with it. He touched one of the branches, pulling it down and watching it spring back when he released it. True strength includes flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking, to yield without collapsing, to adapt without losing your essential nature. The willow yields, but it doesn't uproot. It bends, but it doesn't break. This is a strength that lasts. The young man asked, "But how do you know when to stand firm and when to bend? Don't some things require us to be rigid, to not yield?" "Yes," Riku acknowledged. "The willow has strong roots. It's flexible in its branches, but grounded in its foundation. The key is knowing what's essential and what's not. Your core values, your true nature, these are like the willow's roots. They ground you, but your opinions, your plans, your preferences, these can be like the branches. They can bend, adapt, Yield without threatening who you fundamentally are. He gestured to where the oak and pine had once stood. These trees tried to keep everything rigid. Every branch, every position. They couldn't distinguish between what was essential to hold firm and what could be released. So when the great test came, they lost everything. The willow knew what to hold and what to release. It held its roots and released its branches to the wind. That's wisdom. Years later, the weeping willow became a teaching symbol in the village. Parents would bring children to see it, telling them the story of the great storm. Teachers would use it to illustrate the difference between rigidity and strength. Couples in conflict would sit beneath it, reminding themselves that yielding to each other wasn't losing, but creating a relationship that could weather storms. Riku, now an old man, would still visit the willow regularly. He had learned his lesson deeply. His life had brought many storms, many winds that could have broken him if he had stood rigid against them. But he had learned to bend, to yield, to move with forces he couldn't resist. And like the willow, he had survived, even thrived, not despite his flexibility, but because of it. One day, a master carpenter from the capital came to the village seeking Riku's advice. "I'm known for my rigid standards, my unwillingness to compromise," the master said. "But I'm miserable, and my relationships are all strained. People say I should learn from you." Riku took him to the willow. "What do you see?" "A tree with drooping branches. It looks weak." "It's the only tree that survived the great storm. Everything that looked strong broke. This tree that looks weak stood firm, not through rigidity, but through flexibility." He let this sink in before continuing. "Your rigidity feels like strength because you're in control, imposing your will, but it's actually brittleness. When life brings forces stronger than your will, you'll break. Learn to bend. Learn to yield. Not in your core principles, but in your attachment to having everything your way. True mastery includes knowing when to stand firm and when to flow." Tonight, as you rest, notice where you're holding rigid. What positions are you gripping too tightly? What plans are you clinging to that life is asking you to release? Where might you need to be more like the weeping willow, yielding to forces you can't control, bending so you don't break? Strength isn't always about standing firm. Sometimes it's about flowing with what comes. Sometimes the greatest power is in yielding, adapting, and moving with life rather than against it. The willow survives because it doesn't fight battles it can't win. It bends, knowing that bending isn't breaking. Let yourself bend tonight. Let yourself yield to rest, to uncertainty, to whatever is. Don't be rigid in your expectations of how this should feel or what should happen. Flow like the willow's branches in the wind, trusting that your roots are strong enough to hold you even as you move with forces beyond your control. Yielding isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And tonight, it's the way to deep rest. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a monastery at the base of a great mountain, students gathered each year to receive teachings from the head monk, a man named Zenkai who was famous for his wisdom. Students would travel from across the country to ask him questions and receive his guidance. One year, a particularly arrogant young scholar arrived. He had studied Buddhism at several temples, read countless sutras, and believed himself quite learned. He came to test Zenkai, to see if this famous teacher truly deserved his reputation. "Master Zenkai," the scholar said, bowing with perfect form but little genuine respect, "I have a question about the teaching of emptiness. In the Heart Sutra, it says that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. But in the Lotus Sutra, there seems to be a different interpretation. How do you reconcile these apparent contradictions?" Zenkai looked at the scholar for a long moment. Then he said, "What color is the mountain?" The scholar was confused by this response, which seemed to have nothing to do with his sophisticated question. "The mountain? It's gray? Brown? I don't see how that's relevant to my question about the sutras." "Look at the mountain more carefully," Zenkai said. "What color is it really?" Irritated, but willing to play along, the scholar looked at the mountain. "It's multiple colors: gray rock, brown earth, green trees, white snow on the peak. But master, this doesn't answer my question about the sutras." "In the morning light," Zenkai continued as if the scholar hadn't spoken, "the mountain appears pink and gold. In the evening light, it turns purple and deep blue. In fog, it vanishes completely. In moonlight, it becomes silver. So what color is the mountain?" "It depends on the light, the weather, the time of day," the scholar said impatiently. "But surely you're not suggesting that we ignore the profound philosophical questions raised by the sutras in favor of simple observations about scenery." "I'm suggesting," Zenkai said gently, "that you're asking the wrong question, or rather, you're asking the right question in the wrong way. You want me to give you an intellectually satisfying answer about emptiness that you can add to your collection of knowledge. But emptiness is not a concept to understand. It's a reality to experience." He stood up. "Come with me." Zenkai led the scholar outside and had him sit facing the mountain. "Stay here until you understand the mountain's answer," he said, and walked away. The scholar sat, confused and annoyed. This was not what he had come for. He wanted sophisticated discourse, not this simple sitting and looking. But Zenkai had set the task, and the scholar's pride wouldn't let him give up without trying. He sat there for hours, looking at the mountain. At first, his mind was full of arguments and analysis. He thought about the various sutras, about philosophical positions, about how he would describe this waste of time to his friends at the university. But as the hours passed, something shifted. The afternoon light changed. Clouds moved across the peak. A bird flew past. The mountain simply was, doing nothing, proving nothing, arguing nothing. It had no opinion about emptiness or form. It wasn't trying to be right or wrong. It was just mountain, completely present, completely itself. And sitting there, the scholar's busy mind began to quiet. His need to be right, to demonstrate his knowledge, to prove his intelligence, all of it started to seem less important. He was just a person sitting, looking at a mountain. No questions to answer, no position to defend. Just this moment of being present. As evening came, Zenkai returned. "Did the mountain answer your question?" The scholar was surprised to find he had tears in his eyes. "The mountain showed me that I was so busy being right that I had forgotten how to simply be. I could quote sutras about emptiness, but I wasn't empty. I was full of myself, full of my knowledge, full of my need to demonstrate my understanding. The mountain doesn't try to understand itself, it just is. And in that isness, there's a kind of wisdom that all my study never touched. Zenkai nodded. You came here with the right answer to your question already prepared. You just wanted me to confirm it so you could feel superior. But I gave you a wrong answer, an irrelevant response about the color of a mountain, and that wrong answer taught you more than my right answer ever could. How so? The scholar asked. Because it frustrated your expectations. It pulled you out of your intellectual comfort zone. It made you sit with uncertainty and not knowing. It brought you into direct contact with reality instead of concepts about reality. Being right keeps you in your head. Being wrong, being confused, not knowing. These open you to actually learning something. The scholar stayed at the monastery for 3 months, not as a scholar testing a teacher, but as a genuine student. And during that time, he learned more than in all his years of study. He learned that wisdom isn't the accumulation of right answers, but the capacity to be present. He learned that understanding comes not from intellectual mastery, but from direct experience. One day, a new student arrived and asked Zenkai a complicated philosophical question. The student expected an elaborate answer, but Zenkai simply said, "What color is the mountain?" The new student looked confused, just as the scholar had. The scholar, who was nearby, smiled. He understood now. The master wasn't being cryptic or difficult. He was offering the most direct teaching possible. Stop trying to be right. Start being present. The answers you seek aren't in your head. They're in the direct experience of reality, which is always here, always available, like a mountain that needs no explanation for its being. Years later, when the former scholar had become a teacher himself, students would sometimes ask him complicated questions, showing off their learning, and he would remember Zenkai's method. Sometimes he would answer their question directly, but sometimes he would give them what appeared to be a wrong answer, an irrelevant response, something that would frustrate their expectation of being confirmed in their rightness. Being right is a prison, he would tell them when they complained. When you're sure you're right, you stop looking, stop questioning, stop being open to reality as it actually is. Sometimes the best teaching is the one that makes you wrong, that strips away your certainty, that leaves you not knowing. In that not knowing, real understanding becomes possible. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might notice all the ways you're trying to be right. Right about how you should relax, right about how sleep should come, right about what this experience should be like. What if you let go of being right? What if you allowed yourself to not know, to be uncertain, to be present to whatever this moment actually is, rather than what you think it should be? The mountain doesn't try to be the right kind of mountain. It is just a mountain, completely without self-consciousness or doubt. You don't need to be the right kind of person or rest the right way. You can just be completely, presently, without the burden of rightness. Let your certainty go. Let your need to understand go. Let yourself be wrong, confused, not knowing. And in that openness, rest comes naturally, like evening light on a mountain that never asked to be any particular color. In a village where bread was the staple food, there lived a baker named Tomoe, who had learned the craft from her mother and grandmother. She took great pride in her work, waking before dawn each day to prepare dough, tend the oven, and produce loaves that the village depended on. Tomo had baked thousands of loaves over the years, and she rarely made mistakes anymore. Her hands knew the feel of properly kneaded dough. Her eyes could judge oven temperature by the color of the fire. Her timing was precise. Day after day, she produced bread that was consistently good, reliable, exactly what people expected. But one morning, something went wrong. A neighbor had stopped by to talk just as Tomo was loading loaves into the oven. Distracted by the conversation, she forgot about the bread. By the time she remembered, smoke was pouring from the oven. She pulled out loaf after loaf of burnt bread, each one blackened and ruined. Tomo was devastated. In 15 years of baking, she had never destroyed an entire day's batch. The waste of ingredients troubled her. The loss of income for the day worried her. But most of all, her pride was wounded. She had been perfect for so long, and now she had failed in the most basic way. She sat among the burnt loaves, feeling terrible. Her young apprentice, a girl named Kiku, came in and saw the disaster. "What happened?" Kiku asked. "I forgot," Tomo said miserably. "I was distracted and I forgot. After 15 years of baking, I made a beginner's mistake." Kiku picked up one of the burnt loaves, examining it. "So this is what happens when bread stays in the oven too long." "Yes, it's completely ruined, worthless." But Kiku was looking at it with fascination. She had been apprenticing for 6 months and had never seen burnt bread before. Tomo was so skilled that mistakes never happened in her presence. "How much too long was it in there?" Kiku asked. Tomoe thought. "Perhaps 10 minutes passed when I should have removed it. And what if it had been 5 minutes too long instead of 10? Tomoe considered this. She had actually never experimented with deliberately over-baking bread, so she wasn't certain. "I suppose it would be burnt, but less severely. Could it still be eaten if it were only 5 minutes over? Perhaps if you cut away the worst parts." Kiku set down the burnt loaf and picked up another. "And this one is burnt differently than that one. Why?" Tomo looked more carefully at the loaves she had been too upset to really examine. Kiku was right. They had been in different parts of the oven, so they had burnt in different ways. Some were charred uniformly. Others were only burnt on one side. Some had burnt crusts but soft interiors. Each loaf told a story about where it had been in the oven and how fire had affected it. "I've been baking for 6 months," Kiku said, "and I've only learned how to do things right. I've never learned what happens when things go wrong, but you just learned more in one mistake than I've learned in weeks of getting it right." Tomo looked at her young apprentice with new appreciation. The girl had wisdom beyond her years. "You're right," Tomo said slowly. "I've been so focused on perfection that I've stopped learning. Every loaf I bake comes out the same. I'm not growing or discovering anything new. I'm just repeating what I already know how to do." She stood up and examined the burnt loaves more systematically. "This one," she said, pointing, "was at the back of the oven where it's hottest. It burnt fastest. These along the side got less direct heat. They took longer to burn. And this one right in front, it actually caught fire briefly before I pulled it out." Kiku watched her teacher transform from defeated to curious, from ashamed to engaged. "You know what?" Tomo said. "I'm going to deliberately burn some bread. Different amounts, different positions in the oven, different types of dough. I'm going to learn what I don't know because I've been too careful to ever make these mistakes. Over the following weeks, Tomo conducted experiments that would have horrified her former perfectionist self. She deliberately overbaked loaves to see what happened. She underbaked some. She tried different temperatures, different positions in the oven, different lengths of time. She made every mistake she could think of, carefully observing the results. What she learned transformed her baking. She discovered that what she had called perfect was actually just one point on a spectrum of possibilities. She found that slightly underbaked bread had a chewier texture that some people preferred. She learned that bread with a darker crust had a richer flavor. She discovered techniques she never would have tried if she hadn't been forced out of her perfect routine by that first mistake. Her bread became more varied, more interesting, more responsive to what different customers wanted. People who had been eating her consistently good bread for years suddenly found themselves excited by it again. "What changed?" they would ask. "Your bread seems different lately." Tomo would smile and say, "I finally made a mistake. And that mistake taught me more than years of getting it right." One day, a traveling baker who was considered a master of the craft stopped at Tomo's shop. He tasted her bread and was impressed. "You understand bread deeply," he said. "How did you learn so much?" "I burnt a whole day's batch," Tomo replied, "and instead of just feeling bad about it, I decided to learn from it. That mistake opened doors I didn't even know existed." The master baker nodded knowingly. The problem with being good at something is that you stop making mistakes. And when you stop making mistakes, you stop learning. You just keep repeating what you already know. It's the mistakes, if you pay attention to them, that show you what you don't yet understand. He looked around at her thriving shop. People think mastery means never making mistakes, but real mastery comes from making mistakes consciously, learning from them, and letting them teach you what success never can. Years later, when Kiku had become a skilled baker herself and taken over Tomo's shop, she would tell new apprentices about the day of the burnt bread. "My teacher was perfect for 15 years, she would say, and in those 15 years, her skill barely grew. But one mistake, one moment of failure, opened up years of new learning. Don't fear mistakes. Pay attention to them. They're often more valuable teachers than success." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own burnt bread, the mistakes you've made, the failures you've experienced, the times things went wrong. Are you still punishing yourself for these mistakes? Still seeing them only as evidence of inadequacy? What if those mistakes were actually your best teachers? What if failure, when you pay attention to it, reveals possibilities that success keeps hidden? What if the things you did wrong showed you more than all the things you did right? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get everything right. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is make a mistake, pay attention to what happens, and let it teach you what you couldn't learn any other way. Rest now in acceptance of your imperfect humanity. Your mistakes are not failures. They're experiments. They're lessons. They're the burnt bread that teaches you something new about the oven of your own life. Let them nourish your wisdom instead of poisoning your peace. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. At the edge of a village stood a house whose small garden received almost no direct sunlight. Tall buildings on either side cast shadows that leave the garden in shade for all but an hour each day. The previous owners had tried repeatedly to grow sun-loving flowers and vegetables, but everything either died or grew weak and spindly, stretching desperately toward the brief sliver of light. When Yuki moved into the house, neighbors warned her about the garden. "Nothing grows there," they said. "The shade is too deep. Better to pave it over and use it for storage." But Yuki looked at the shaded space differently. "It's not that nothing can grow here," she said. "It's that sun-loving plants can't grow here. The garden isn't bad. It's just suited for different things than the previous owners were trying to grow." She began researching plants that thrived in shade, ferns that loved the dim moisture, hostas with broad leaves that caught what little light appeared, shade-loving flowers that bloomed in muted colors, but with delicate beauty. Instead of fighting the garden's nature, she worked with it. Within a year, Yuki's shaded garden was lush and beautiful. It didn't look like sunny gardens with their bright flowers and robust vegetables. It had a different aesthetic, subtle, cool, mysterious. The greens were deeper, the flowers were more delicate. The whole space had a quality of quiet richness that sun-blasted gardens never achieved. Neighbors who had declared the space hopeless came to see what Yuki had created. They were amazed, though some were still dismissive. "It's pretty," one neighbor said, "but it's not a real garden. Real gardens have tomatoes and sunflowers and bright colors. Your garden is just making the best of bad conditions." "Are its conditions bad?" Yuki asked. "Or just different conditions?" "These ferns and hostas are barely surviving. They're thriving. They're doing exactly what they evolved to do in exactly the kind of environment they need. The previous owners failed because they tried to grow sun plants in shade. I'm succeeding because I'm growing shade plants in shade." She touched a particularly lush fern. "This plant would die in full sun. It needs shade. For this fern, my garden isn't difficult conditions, it's ideal conditions. The mistake is measuring all gardens by sun garden standards and calling everything else deficient." A young woman named Hannah, who lived nearby, was struck by this perspective. Hannah had always felt like she was growing in the shade in difficult circumstances that made the kind of success others achieved impossible for her. She had health issues that limited her energy. She lived in poverty, which restricted her opportunities. She lacked the family support that others took for granted. Everyone told her she needed to overcome these limitations, to find more light, to transform her difficult conditions into easier ones. But what if, like Yuki's garden, she just needed to stop trying to grow like a sun plant and instead discover how to thrive as a shade plant? She came to talk with Yuki about this idea. "I feel like I'm always failing," Hana admitted, "because I can't achieve what healthy, wealthy people with family support achieve. I'm trying to grow tomatoes in shade, basically. But I don't know what the equivalent of shade plants would be for a human life." Yuki walked her through the garden, explaining her choices. "See how I chose plants that need less energy? That's like you choosing work that fits your energy levels rather than jobs that demand more than you can give. See how I selected plants that thrive in cool, moist conditions? That's like you finding strengths that develop specifically because of your limitations, not despite them." She pointed to a particularly beautiful shade flower. This would never survive in full sun. Its delicate petals would burn. But here, protected from harsh light, it blooms with a beauty that sun lovers can't achieve. Your limitations might protect you from certain kinds of harm while allowing you to develop qualities that people in easier conditions never develop. Hannah began to reconsider her entire life. What if she stopped measuring herself by sun garden standards? What if she found shade garden ways to thrive? She had deep empathy, probably developed through her own suffering. She had patience, learned through chronic illness. She had creativity in making do with little, born from poverty. These weren't consolation prizes for failing at normal success. These were actual strengths, shade plant qualities that were valuable in themselves. She started making different choices. She took a job that paid less, but required less energy, allowing her to work sustainably rather than constantly burning out. She developed friendships with others who lived in shade, creating community with people who understood difficult circumstances. She stopped apologizing for needing things that others didn't need, recognizing that shade plants legitimately need different care than sun plants. Word spread about Yuki's garden and the perspective it represented. People who felt they were growing in difficult conditions began to see themselves differently. A man with learning disabilities stopped trying to compete in academic environments and found work that used his practical intelligence. A woman with anxiety stopped forcing herself into high-stress social situations and built a life that honored her need for quiet. A family with limited income stopped feeling inadequate for not achieving wealth and found richness in their strong relationships. The shade garden teaching, as people began to call it, spread beyond individuals to organizations. A school started creating shade garden programs for students who couldn't thrive in standard classroom environments. A business developed positions specifically designed for people with limitations that made traditional jobs difficult. A community center created spaces for people who needed accommodations that mainstream spaces didn't provide. Not everyone appreciated this perspective. Some critics said it encouraged people to accept limitations rather than overcoming them. You're telling people to give up, they argued, to accept that they can't thrive in normal conditions rather than working to change their circumstances. Yuki would answer these critics by walking them through her garden. Look at these plants. Should they be working to become sun plants? Should they be trying to overcome their shade-thriving nature? Or should they be celebrated for being excellent at what they actually are? She would point to a struggling plant that needed more light. Sometimes you do need to change conditions. This plant is genuinely in the wrong place. It needs to be moved to a more light-filled place. But most of these plants, they're exactly where they should be, thriving in conditions that sun plants would call impossible. The question isn't whether to overcome all limitations. The question is whether your limitations are like shade for a shade plant, the right conditions for your actual nature, or like shade for a sun plant, wrong conditions that need to change. A teacher named Nobuo applied this to his classroom. He stopped trying to make all students thrive in the same way. He recognized that some students were sun plants who needed bright, fast-paced, competitive environments. Others were shade plants that needed quiet, slow, supportive conditions. Trying to make shade plant students compete in sun plant ways was as futile as trying to grow ferns in full sun. He created different pathways through his curriculum, different ways to demonstrate learning, and different environments within his classroom. And he found that students he had previously considered struggling were actually thriving. They just needed shade garden conditions to show what they could do. Years later, Yuki's garden became something of a pilgrimage site for people living in difficult circumstances. They would come to see that lushness was possible even in shade, that beauty didn't require ideal conditions, that thriving could look different from what sunny gardens showed. Yuki, now elderly, would sit in her garden talking with visitors. The hardest thing, she would tell them, is stopping comparing yourself to sun gardens. Stop measuring your lushness by their standards. Stop trying to be bright when your beauty is subtle. Once you accept that you're a shade garden, once you stop apologizing for it and start working with it, you discover possibilities you never knew existed. She would touch the ferns and hostas she had planted decades earlier, now mature and magnificent. These plants are barely surviving in bad conditions. They're thriving in ideal conditions for their nature. The shade isn't their obstacle, it's their element. And the same might be true for you. Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider the shade you're growing in. The difficult conditions you've been taught to see as obstacles might actually be the right environment for who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who sun gardens demand, but who you actually are. Stop trying to grow sun plants in shade. Stop measuring yourself by standards designed for different conditions. Start asking, what does thriving look like for a shade plant? What can I grow that loves these exact conditions? What beauty can emerge specifically because of these limitations, not despite them? Rest now in your shade garden. Let yourself be a fern, a hosta, a delicate shade flower. Stop burning yourself trying to bloom in full sun. Sink into the cool moisture of your actual conditions and discover what wants to grow there. Shade isn't a deficiency. It's just a different light. And different light creates different beauty. Trust that yours is worth growing. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In the mountains far from any town, there lived a hermit named Ryanan who had retreated from society to live in solitude. He had built a small hut beside a stream and spent his days in meditation, contemplation, and simple living. He sought no company, spoke to no one, desired only silence and solitude. Ryanan had not always been a hermit. For many years, he had lived in the capital city, working as a scholar at a prestigious academy. He had been surrounded by people constantly, engaged in endless conversations, debates, and social obligations. His days were filled with meetings, his evenings with gatherings, his mind always occupied with the opinions and expectations of others. He had been respected in those days, successful by any measure, but he had felt increasingly hollow, as if the constant engagement with others was somehow preventing him from engaging with himself. Every conversation pulled him outward. Every social obligation demanded he present a certain face, play a certain role. He began to feel like a performer in his own life, never quite sure who he was beneath all the performances. So one day, without announcement or explanation, Ryanan left. He walked away from his position, his reputation, his comfortable life, and disappeared into the mountains. He wanted only to be alone. to find in solitude what he had lost in society. For the first year, he lived in complete isolation. He built his hut with his own hands, slowly and carefully, in no particular hurry. He learned to grow simple vegetables. He learned the rhythms of the mountain, the patterns of weather, and the habits of the animals who shared the forest. He sat in meditation for hours each day, not trying to achieve anything, just sitting with the silence. The silence was difficult at first. His mind was so accustomed to constant stimulation that it created its own noise, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios, filling the quiet with internal chatter. But gradually, over months, the internal noise began to settle. Gaps appeared between thoughts. The silence became less empty and more full, filled with the subtle sounds of wind in trees, water over stones, his own breathing. Ryanan found that in this silence, he could hear things he had never heard before. Not voices or supernatural sounds, but deeper truths about himself and about life. Insights would arise naturally, not from thinking or reasoning, but from simply being present. He began to understand things he had studied for years, but never really grasped. The difference between knowledge and wisdom. The difference between being alone and being lonely. The difference between silence and emptiness. But something strange began to happen. The more Ryanan retreated into solitude, the more visitors he attracted. At first, it was just a wandering monk who happened upon his hut and asked for water. Ryanan gave him water, and the monk went on his way. But somehow, word spread. There was a hermit in the mountains, someone who had given up the world, someone who lived in complete simplicity and silence. People began to seek him out. They would make the long journey up the mountain path, arriving at his hut with questions, seeking wisdom, wanting to learn from this man who had withdrawn from society. At first, Ryanan was dismayed. He had come to the mountains precisely to escape people, to be alone. When he saw visitors approaching, he would hide inside his hut, waiting for them to leave. But they wouldn't leave. They would sit outside his door, sometimes for days, patient and persistent. Eventually, Ryanan realized that hiding was pointless. These people had traveled far to see him. The least he could do was acknowledge them. So he began to receive visitors, though reluctantly. He would listen to their questions and offer what responses came to him. He never tried to be wise or profound. He simply spoke from his experience of solitude and silence. The puzzling thing was that the more plainly he spoke, the more wisdom people found in his words. When he'd lived in the city, surrounded by people, busy with social obligations and scholarly debates, no one had sought his wisdom particularly. He had been respected, certainly, but not sought out as a teacher. Now that he had nothing to say and no desire to teach, people traveled great distances to hear from him. One day, he asked a visitor directly, "Why do you come here?" "I was a scholar once, surrounded by books and ideas and other learned people. No one traveled to seek my wisdom then. Now I live in a hut in the mountains. I've read no books in years, and I have no new ideas to offer. Why travel so far to talk to someone who has nothing to give you?" The visitor, a merchant named Taro, who had closed his business for a week to make this journey, thought carefully before answering. "In town," Taro said, "everyone is so busy talking that no one is listening. Everyone has so many ideas, so many opinions, so much they want to say that there's no space for wisdom to emerge. Conversations are just people waiting for their turn to speak, not actually hearing each other. You're different. You have silence. You have space. When you speak, even just a few words, they matter because they come from stillness rather than from the noise of a busy mind. He shifted his position on the ground where they sat. And there's something else. In the city, I'm surrounded by people, but I feel more alone than you probably do here in your solitude. Everyone wants something from me. They want my money, my influence, my agreement, my approval. Every conversation has an agenda. But you want nothing from me. You didn't ask me to come here. You gain nothing from talking to me. That makes your words trustworthy. I can actually hear them because I'm not wondering what you're trying to get from me. Another visitor, a young woman named Hana, who had been struggling with the question of whether to marry a man her family had chosen, explained her reason for coming. Everyone in my life has an opinion about what I should do, she said. My parents think I should marry this man because it's a good match for the family. My friends think I should refuse because I don't love him. Everyone is so certain, so full of advice, so ready to tell me the right answer. But you're the first person who didn't immediately tell me what to do. You just listened. And in that listening, in that space you created, I could finally hear my own wisdom. The answer was in me all along, but I couldn't hear it over everyone else's voices. Ryonan began to understand. It wasn't despite his solitude that people sought him out, but because of it. In his withdrawal from society, he had created something increasingly rare. Space, silence, presence unburdened by agenda or expectation. And people were drawn to that the way thirsty travelers are drawn to water in the desert. He noticed something else too. The wisdom people attributed to him wasn't really his wisdom at all. It emerged from the silence he had cultivated. In the stillness of his solitary life, he could hear things that the noise of society drowned out. He could see clearly because his vision wasn't constantly pulled in multiple directions. He could speak truthfully because he had no reputation to protect, no social position to defend, no need to appear wise or knowledgeable. In the city, he had been so concerned with how others perceived him, with maintaining his scholarly reputation, with not saying anything foolish, that his words had been calculated and careful. Now, with no one to impress and nothing to lose, he simply said what was true. And paradoxically, this made his words more valuable. A scholar from the academy where Ryonan had once taught made the journey to see him. The scholar, a man named Masao, who had been Ryonan's colleague, couldn't understand why Ryonan had left such a prestigious position. "You were brilliant," Masao said. "You could have become the head of the academy. You could have written books that would have been studied for generations. Instead, you're here in a hut in the mountains, accomplishing nothing. Don't you feel you've wasted your potential?" Ryonan smiled. "When I was at the academy, I was surrounded by brilliant people, impressive ideas, important work. But I felt empty. I was always performing, always trying to prove something, always concerned with how others judged me and my ideas. Here, I accomplish nothing by the world's standards, but I'm not empty anymore." "But you could have influenced so many people from that position," Masao protested. "I influence more people now," Ryonan replied quietly. not through my scholarship or my position, but through my presence. People come here seeking something they can't find in the busy world, and I can offer it to them precisely because I've stepped out of that busy world. If I had stayed at the academy, I would have had a position and a reputation, but I wouldn't have had what these people are seeking. Masao looked uncomfortable. What exactly are they seeking? Space, Ryanan said. Silence. Someone who will listen without agenda. Someone who isn't trying to convince them of anything or get anything from them. Someone who has stepped out of the endless competition and comparison and striving that fills the world. I couldn't offer that while I was still caught up in it myself. He gestured to the quiet forest around them. This solitude isn't empty, as you seem to think. It's full of attention, presence, awareness. When you're constantly busy, constantly engaged, constantly consuming information and experience and interaction, there's no space for anything deeper to emerge. You fill your life so completely with activity that wisdom has nowhere to appear. But when you create space, when you embrace solitude even briefly, wisdom has room to arise. Masao stayed for 3 days, and during that time, something shifted in him. The first day, he kept trying to debate and discuss, to engage Ryanan in the kind of intellectual sparring they had done at the academy. But Ryanan wouldn't engage. He would simply sit in silence or make tea or suggest they walk in the forest. At first, Masao found this frustrating, but by the second day, he began to notice something. His mind, which was usually so busy with thoughts and arguments and analyses, was beginning to quiet. In the space Ryanan created through his silence, Masao's own deeper thoughts could finally surface. By the third day, Masao understood. "You're teaching me even though you're not saying much of anything," he said. "The teaching is in the space itself, in the silence. I can hear my own wisdom because you're not filling all the space with yours." Ryanan nodded. "At the academy, we competed to be the most impressive speaker, the most brilliant thinker. We filled every silence with words, every space with ideas. But wisdom doesn't emerge from fullness. It emerges from emptiness. The sage isn't the one with the most to say, but the one who creates space for what needs to be heard." Years passed, and Ryanan's hut became something of a pilgrimage site. But he never encouraged this. He never advertised his presence or claimed any special wisdom. He simply continued living as he had been, in solitude and silence, receiving those who came to him but never seeking them out. One day, a young man arrived who reminded Ryanan of himself many years ago. The young man was ambitious, successful, recognized in his field, but he was also hollow, exhausted, playing a role rather than living a life. "Should I give it all up?" the young man asked. "Should I leave society like you did?" Ryanan looked at him carefully. "Why would you do that?" "Because you found peace here. You found wisdom. Maybe I need to become a hermit too." "I didn't find peace because I became a hermit," Ryanan said. "I became a hermit because I needed to find peace and I couldn't find it in the busy world. But the lesson isn't that everyone should flee to the mountains. The lesson is about creating space, cultivating silence, stepping back from constant busyness and engagement. You can do that without leaving society." He poured tea for both of them. Some people need to physically retreat to learn solitude. Others can cultivate it right in the middle of the busy world. The external form matters less than the internal reality. What matters is whether you create space in your life for silence, for reflection, for listening to deeper wisdom. Whether you do that in a hut on a mountain or in a house in a city, the principle is the same. The young man looked disappointed. So you're not going to tell me to become a hermit? I'm going to tell you to become familiar with solitude, Rhiannon replied. To learn to be alone without being lonely. To create spaces in your busy life where you're not consuming, not producing, not performing, just being. Maybe that means taking a walk alone each day. Maybe it means sitting in silence for an hour each morning. Maybe it means turning off all your devices for one day a week and just being present to yourself and to life. The specific form doesn't matter. What matters is that you stop filling every moment with activity and create space for something deeper to emerge. He looked out at the forest. People come here thinking I have some special wisdom to give them. But all I really offer is space and silence. And they discover that in that space, their own wisdom can finally be heard. The wisdom was always there. It was just drowned out by noise and busyness. Solitude doesn't create wisdom. It reveals the wisdom that was hidden. The young man stayed for a week, and each day Rhiannon gave him less and less instruction. By the end of the week, they would sit together for hours without speaking, just being present to the silence and to each other. And the young man found that these silent hours taught him more than all the words he had heard in years of seeking teachers and reading books. When he left, he thanked Rhiannon. I thought you would teach me something. Instead, you showed me how to hear what I already knew. That's the only teaching worth giving, Rhiannon replied. As more years passed, Rhiannon noticed an interesting pattern. The people who traveled to see him once rarely came back. It wasn't that they were disappointed, but rather that they had learned what they needed to learn. They had experienced solitude, discovered their own inner wisdom, and carried that back to their lives. They didn't need to keep returning because the teaching wasn't dependent on his physical presence. It was about a principle they could apply anywhere. A few visitors did return, usually in times of crisis or transition, and Rhiannon always received them, but he noticed that these return visits were shorter. The people knew now how to create their own space, their own silence. They came not because they needed him specifically, but because his hut represented a physical manifestation of the inner solitude they were learning to cultivate. One day, an old friend from his academy days came to visit. This friend, whose name was Kenji, had become the head of the academy, achieving the position Rhiannon could have had. He arrived looking exhausted, burdened by responsibility and expectation. I've achieved everything we once talked about achieving, Kenji said. I have the position, the respect, the influence. So why do I feel so empty? Rhiannon recognized this emptiness. It was what he had felt all those years ago, what had driven him to the mountains. Because you have everything except space, Rhiannon said. Your life is so full of accomplishment that there's no room left for being. You've filled every moment with doing, and you've lost touch with the silence beneath all the doing. But I can't just abandon everything, Kenji protested. I have responsibilities. People depend on me. I'm not suggesting you abandon anything, Rhiannon replied. I'm suggesting you find spaces within your full life where you can be empty. Even brief moments of solitude of silence, of stopping. These moments are not wasted time. They're the moments where you reconnect with who you are beneath all your roles and responsibilities. He stood up and walked to the edge of his small clearing. I came to the mountains because I needed radical solitude to remember myself. But now I carry that solitude with me. Even when visitors are here, even when I'm engaged with others, there's a core of silence in me that remains untouched. That's what you need to find. Not external solitude necessarily, but internal solitude that you can access even in the middle of busyness. Kenji stayed for several days, and Rhiannon taught him simple practices. Sitting in silence for even 10 minutes each morning. Taking a walk alone without purpose or destination. Eating one meal a day without distraction, just noticing the food and the act of eating. Creating small pockets of solitude within a busy life. When Kenji returned to the academy, he began implementing these practices, and he found that these small moments of solitude transformed his entire experience of his busy life. He was less reactive, more present, more capable of hearing his own wisdom beneath the noise of constant demands. He wrote to Rhiannon, "I understand now what you've been teaching. Solitude isn't about being alone. It's about creating space. And that space is what allows wisdom to emerge, what allows us to hear truth, what allows us to be present rather than just constantly doing. Thank you for showing me that I didn't need to abandon my life. I just needed to find space within it." Rhiannon smiled when he read this letter. This was the real teaching. Not that everyone should become a hermit, but that everyone needs solitude in some form. Space where they're not performing, not producing, not consuming, just being. As Rhiannon grew older, he noticed that fewer visitors came, not because his reputation had diminished, but because the teaching had spread. People had learned to create their own solitude, their own silence. They didn't need to journey to a hut in the mountains because they had learned to find that mountain stillness within themselves wherever they were. One evening, as Rhiannon sat watching the sunset from his hut, he reflected on the paradox of his life. He had retreated to solitude, seeking only to be alone, and in doing so, he had touched more lives than he ever had in his busy years at the academy. By wanting nothing, he had given something valuable. By seeking no students, he had taught countless people. By embracing emptiness, he had offered fullness. The teaching wasn't really his, he realized. It was simply what emerged when space was created. The wisdom people found when they visited him wasn't his wisdom. It was their own wisdom, finally audible in the silence he created around himself. He was just a mirror, reflecting back to people what they already knew but had forgotten in the noise of their busy lives. Tonight, as you rest, you're entering into solitude. Not the solitude of a hermit in the mountains, but the solitude of sleep, of withdrawal from the day's engagements, of stepping back from constant doing into simple being. In this solitude, you might find what busy people seek from hermits: space where your own wisdom can be heard, silence where truth can emerge, emptiness where fullness becomes apparent. You don't need to travel to mountains or build a hut or give up your life. You just need to create moments like this one. Moments where you stop filling every space with activity and allow silence to speak. The wisdom you're seeking isn't somewhere else. It's here in you, waiting to be heard. but it can only be heard in silence, in solitude, in the space you create by ceasing to be constantly busy. Rest now in the solitude of this moment. Let the silence teach you. Let the space fill you. What you've been seeking in all your busy engagement with the world is here, has always been here, waiting in the quiet. Solitude doesn't attract wisdom from outside. It reveals the wisdom that was always inside, just waiting for space to emerge. Be still, be silent, be empty, and discover that emptiness is the fullness you've been seeking all along. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a village rebuilding after a great earthquake, there was a master mason named Takeo who was known throughout the region for building walls that followed precise specifications. Every stone placed according to traditional methods, every measurement exact, every joint perfect. His walls were architectural achievements, admired by other masons and praised in the capital. When the earthquake struck and buildings collapsed throughout the region, everyone expected Takeo's walls to stand as a testament to proper craftsmanship. Instead, most of his carefully built walls fell. The perfect joints fractured. The precisely placed stones tumbled. All that meticulous work reduced to rubble. But there was one wall that remained standing, and it puzzled everyone. It was a wall that Takeo's apprentice, a young man named Jiro, had built in the early days of his training. The wall wasn't straight. It curved and bent in unusual ways. The stones weren't uniform or perfectly fitted. By every standard of proper masonry, the wall was wrong. Takeo had been embarrassed by it, had planned to tear it down and rebuild it properly, but had never gotten around to it. Now that the crooked, imperfect wall stood while all of Takeo's masterpieces lay in ruins. After the earthquake, people would visit that wall, marveling at how something so improperly built had survived when everything correct had fallen. Takeo was humbled and confused. He went to examine the crooked wall carefully, trying to understand what accidental wisdom it contained. What he discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about his craft. The wall's curves and bends, which he had seen as flaws, had actually allowed it to flex during the earthquake, rather than rigidly resisting the force. The imperfect joints had given the structure some ability to shift without completely fracturing. The irregular stones had created a kind of organic stability that precise, uniform stones couldn't achieve. "I built this wall wrong," Jiro said when he and Takeo examined it together. "I was new. I didn't know the proper methods yet. I just placed stones in ways that felt stable." "You built it intuitively," Takeo replied slowly, "while I built with rigid adherence to rules. Your intuition understood something about forces and flexibility that the traditional methods don't account for. The rules made sense for normal conditions, but they weren't designed for extreme stress. Your ignorance of the rules allowed you to respond to the actual needs of the situation." An engineer from the capital came to study the surviving wall. He measured its curves, examined its composition, and tried to understand its principles. "This wall shouldn't have stood," he said finally. "By every calculation, every principle of proper construction, it should have fallen. But clearly, our principles are incomplete. This wall knows something we don't." Takeo spent months studying not just Jiro's wall, but other structures that had survived. He found a pattern. The buildings that stood weren't always the ones built most correctly. Often, they were the ones with irregular features, with imperfections that accidentally created flexibility. The traditional methods, designed over centuries for stable conditions, weren't necessarily best for extreme conditions. He began incorporating these insights into his new work. He still used traditional methods as a foundation, but he added intentional irregularities, curves instead of straight lines, flexible joints instead of rigid joints of rigid ones, and organic shapes instead of perfect geometry. Other masons criticized him. "You're violating the principles," they said. "You're building incorrectly." "I'm building for survival rather than for appearance," Takeo replied. The old principles were based on aesthetic ideals and normal conditions. "I'm building for abnormal conditions based on what actually survived when everything else fell." His new walls looked less impressive than his old ones. They weren't as straight, as precise, as aesthetically pleasing. But when another earthquake struck years later, these walls stood. The traditional walls, built by masons who still adhered to the old correct methods, fell again. Takeo's irregular, imperfect walls flexed and bent and survived. "What's more important?" Takeo asked his critics. "Building correctly according to traditional standards, or building what actually works?" "My old walls were perfect and dead. My new walls are imperfect and alive." He trained a new generation of masons in what he called flexible building. They learned the traditional methods, but also learned when to deviate from them, when to trust intuition over rules, and when to value survival over correctness. "The crooked wall saved my life," Takeo would tell students. Not just physically, by remaining standing during the earthquake, but professionally and spiritually, by taught me that correctness isn't the same as truth. Something can be done exactly right according to established principles and still fail when conditions change. And something can be done wrong and still succeed because it responds to actual conditions rather than theoretical ideals. One student asked, "So should we ignore all the traditional methods?" "No," Takeo replied. "Learn them, understand them, but don't worship them. Rules are tools, not truths. They work until they don't. The crooked wall taught me to pay attention to what actually works, rather than what should work according to theory. Sometimes the imperfect, the irregular, the supposedly wrong thing contains wisdom that perfection misses." He would take students to see Jiro's wall, still standing decades after the earthquake that revealed its value. "This wall is a better teacher than any master mason," he would say. "It teaches that survival often comes from flexibility rather than rigidity, from imperfection that allows adaptation rather than perfection that allows no variation. It teaches that what's wrong by one standard might be right by a more important standard." The wall became something of a shrine. People would visit it, touch it, and remember that sometimes what appears to be failure or imperfection is actually hidden success. That correctness and effectiveness aren't always the same thing. That rules have limits, and intuition has wisdom. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the crooked walls in your life, the things you've done imperfectly, irregularly, against the rules or proper methods. Perhaps these apparent flaws are actually what allowed you to survive when others who did everything correctly fell apart. Perhaps your imperfections are flexibilities that rigid perfection lacks. You don't have to do everything correctly. You don't have to follow every rule or meet every standard. Sometimes the crooked wall stands when the straight wall falls. Sometimes your irregular, imperfect, supposedly wrong way of doing things is actually what works best for the conditions you're actually in, rather than the ideal conditions that rules assume. Rest now in acceptance of your crooked walls. They may not look perfect. They may not meet conventional standards, but they've kept you standing when straight walls would have crumbled. Your imperfections aren't failures. They're flexible, and flexibility is what allows survival when everything rigid breaks. The crooked wall knows this. Now you know it too. In a village known for its beautiful gardens, there lived a gardener named Sora, who had inherited a plot of land from her grandmother. It was good land, fertile soil, adequate water, positioned to receive both morning and afternoon sun. Sora's neighbours on every side had transformed their properties into showcases of horticultural ambition. There were formal gardens with meticulously pruned trees, vegetable gardens yielding abundant crops, flower gardens that bloomed in careful succession throughout the seasons. But Sora's plot remained empty. Month after month, season after season, year after year, Sora did nothing with her land. She didn't plant, she didn't build, she didn't design or plan or cultivate. She simply left it alone. The neighbours whispered about this. What a waste, they said. Such good land going unused. Some thought Sora was lazy. Others thought she was confused, perhaps not knowing how to garden. A few felt insulted, as if Sora's empty plot was a criticism of their own elaborate efforts. One neighbour, a proud man named Takeshi, whose garden featured rare specimens from distant provinces, finally confronted Sora one spring morning. "Excuse me," he said, his tone barely polite, "but don't you think you should do something with your land? It's an eyesore, frankly, just weeds and wild grass. You're bringing down the beauty of the whole neighborhood." Sora, who had been sitting on her porch drinking tea, smiled gently. "What would you suggest I plant?" "Well, anything," Takeshi gestured expansively. "Vegetables, flowers, trees. Something useful or beautiful. Something that shows you care." "Come," Sora said, standing up. "Let me show you something." She led Takeshi into her supposedly empty plot, but as they walked among the unmown grass and untamed growth, Takeshi began to notice things he hadn't seen from a distance. There were wild flowers he had never seen in cultivated gardens, small, delicate blooms that seemed to glow in the morning light. There were butterflies of species he'd never encountered in his own carefully managed space. Birds nested in the natural tangles of vegetation, singing songs that his pruned and ordered trees never hosted. "Look here," Sora said, kneeling by a patch of plants. "These herbs grow wild here. They're medicinal. I gather them for the village doctor. And see this area? In autumn, mushrooms appear here that are delicious and valuable. I don't plant them. They simply come because the conditions are right." She stood and walked further into the space. "This grass that looks so messy to you, it's habitat for insects that pollinate crops for miles around. Those weeds you mentioned, several are actually rare native plants that have disappeared from cultivated areas. They only survive here because I don't pull them out." Takeshi looked around with new eyes. What he had seen as neglected chaos was actually a thriving ecosystem. What he had judged as emptiness was actually fullness of a different kind. "But you didn't plant any of this," he said, still confused. "You didn't make it happen." "Exactly," Sora replied. "I didn't plant because the land knew better than I did what should grow here. My grandmother taught me this. She said, sometimes the wisest action is to do nothing. Not from laziness, but from trust. Trust that nature has its own intelligence. Trust that things want to grow. Trust that not every space needs to be controlled and designed and managed." She bent down and touched the wild grass gently. "If I had planted a formal garden, I would be fighting against this land's nature. I would pull these native plants to make room for what I decided should be here. I would disrupt the birds and butterflies. I would impose my idea of beauty onto something that already has its own beauty. And I would be working constantly, weeding, watering, pruning, managing. Instead, I do almost nothing, and look what abundance appears." Takeshi was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his own garden, the hours of work it demanded, the constant vigilance against anything growing where he hadn't planned, the way he fought against the land's own tendencies to maintain his vision of order and beauty. "But don't you want to create something?" he asked. "Don't you want to make your mark?" "I am making my mark," Sora said. "I'm making it by not making it. I'm creating space for things to be what they naturally are, rather than forcing them to be what I think they should be. My grandmother said this too. Wu Wei, action through non-action. The doing that comes from not doing. This is not the same as doing nothing. This is carefully doing nothing, intentionally not interfering, wisely allowing." Over the following months, Takeshi found himself visiting Sora's wild plot more often. There was something restful about it, something his own controlled garden didn't offer. In his garden, every plant was in its place, every edge was trimmed, everything was as it should be, according to his plan. It was beautiful, but it was also rigid, tense. It required constant maintenance to prevent nature from asserting its own ideas. In Sora's plot, everything was relaxed. Plants grew where they wanted. Animals came and went freely. The whole space had a quality of natural ease that invited him to ease as well. One day he asked Sora, "How do you know when to act and when not to act? How do you know when doing nothing is wisdom and when it's just avoidance?" Sora thought about this carefully. "I watch," she said. "I pay attention. When I see something struggling that needs help, I help. When I see something growing well on its own, I leave it alone. When I see an invasive plant that will choke out everything else, I remove it. But most of the time, I just watch and trust. The land tells me what it needs. I don't impose my ideas onto it." She smiled. "You know the difference in your own life, don't you? Sometimes you push when pushing is needed. Sometimes you rest when rest is needed. Sometimes you act. Sometimes you wait. The wisdom is in knowing which is which. Not having a rule that you must always act or must always do nothing, but being present enough to sense what this particular moment is asking for." Years passed. Sora's plot remained unplanted, but it became known throughout the region as a refuge for rare plants and animals. Scientists visited to study the species that had disappeared from more cultivated areas but thrived in her space. Children came to see the butterflies and birds. People feeling stressed would sit at the edge of her property, finding peace in its wild beauty. Takeshi gradually changed his approach to his own garden. He didn't abandon it entirely, but he created areas where he did less, managed less, controlled less. And he was surprised to find that these areas often became his favorites. The places where unexpected beauty appeared, where nature revealed its own intelligence. One evening, sitting with Sora on her porch, looking out at her wild plot as fireflies began to light up the dusk, Takeshi said, "I used to think you were lazy. Now I understand you were wise. You saw that not every space needs to be filled. Not every plan needs to be executed. Not every action needs to be taken. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is create space and then get out of the way." Sora nodded. My grandmother had one more saying. The usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness. The usefulness of a house is in its empty space. The usefulness of action is in the space around it where non-action lives. You cannot act wisely if you're always acting. You cannot create room for things to grow if you're always filling every space with your own ideas. She sipped her tea, watching the fireflies. I didn't plant this garden, but I tended it through my not planting. I created it through my not creating, and what appeared was more beautiful, more alive, more true than anything I could have forced into being. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider where in your life you're overacting, over-planning, over-controlling. Where are you filling space that might be better left empty? Where are you imposing your will onto something that has its own wisdom? Where are you so busy doing that you've forgotten the power of allowing? Rest itself is a practice of productive non-action. You don't make yourself sleep. You create conditions for sleep and then get out of the way. You don't force relaxation. You allow it by ceasing to prevent it. Let yourself be like Sora's empty garden tonight, unplanted, unmanaged, allowed to be what it naturally wants to be. Trust that things want to grow, want to rest, want to restore themselves. Your job isn't to force this process, but to create space for it, and then wisely, carefully, intentionally do nothing at all. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is nothing. And sometimes doing nothing is the hardest, most important work of all. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. In the capital city, there was a mirror maker named Eiji, who had perfected his craft over decades. His mirrors were renowned for their clarity. When you looked into one of Eiji's mirrors, you saw yourself exactly as you were. No distortion, no wavering, no cloudiness. Just pure, clear reflection. But Eiji had a strange habit that puzzled his apprentices. After crafting each mirror, after polishing it to perfect clarity, he would sit before it for an hour just looking. Not at his own reflection, but at the mirror itself. Or so it seemed. When asked what he was doing, he would only smile and say, "I'm learning from it." One day, a young apprentice named Hana gathered her courage and asked directly, "Master, what does a mirror have to teach? It only reflects what's placed before it." Eiji gestured for her to sit beside him in front of a newly completed mirror. "Look at this mirror," he said. "What do you see?" "I see my reflection," Hana replied. Yes. And what does the mirror think about your reflection? Hannah frowned. Mirrors don't think. Exactly. The mirror doesn't think you're beautiful or ugly. It doesn't judge you as good or bad. It doesn't prefer one face over another. It simply reflects what is without adding anything of its own. This is the mirror's teaching. He stood up and moved away, leaving the mirror empty of human reflections. Now what does it reflect? He asked. The wall behind it, the window, the light. And does it complain that the wall is less interesting than a human face? Does it wish the light would be different? Does it try to improve what it reflects? No, Hannah said slowly, beginning to understand. It just reflects whatever appears before it, without preference. This, A.G. said, sitting back down, is how I try to experience life. Like a mirror, awareness that reflects everything, without distortion, without judgment, without trying to change what appears. Hannah thought about this. But we're not mirrors. We have thoughts, feelings, preferences. We judge constantly. Yes, A.G. agreed, but beneath all those thoughts and judgments is pure awareness, the part of you that simply sees, simply knows, simply experiences without adding commentary. This awareness is like a mirror. It reflects your thoughts, but it doesn't judge them. It reflects your feelings, but it doesn't resist them. It reflects reality, but it doesn't try to change it into something else. He pointed to the mirror again. When you look in this mirror, it shows you exactly what you are in this moment. If you smile, it shows you smiling. If you frown, it shows you frowning. It doesn't try to make you smile when you're sad. It doesn't criticize you for frowning. It just faithfully, honestly, clearly reflects what is. Hannah stared at the mirror, seeing herself reflected there. She noticed how her mind immediately started judging what she saw. Her nose was too wide, her hair was messy, she looked tired. But the mirror itself held no such judgments. It simply showed her face with perfect neutrality. The suffering we create, A.G. continued, comes largely from our inability to be like mirrors. We see what is, and immediately we add our opinions about what is. We see a thought, and we judge it as good or bad. We see a feeling, and we resist it or cling to it. We see reality, and we compare it to how we think it should be. All of this is distortion, adding things that aren't really there. He stood and walked to where several mirrors stood in various stages of completion. He picked up one that was cloudy, its surface rough. "This mirror distorts," he said, showing Hannah the wavy, unclear reflection it produced. "When you look in it, you can't see yourself clearly. Your image is bent, confused. This is what our minds do when they're full of judgment and resistance and preferences. We can't see reality clearly because we're constantly bending it, distorting it, making it into something that confirms our beliefs." He set down the cloudy mirror and picked up one that was highly polished. "But this mirror," he held it up, showing Hannah her clear reflection, "adds nothing. It has no agenda. It doesn't care what appears before it. It just faithfully reflects moment by moment whatever is present. And in that faithful reflection, there's a kind of peace." Over the following weeks, Hannah began to practice what she called mirror awareness. When thoughts appeared in her mind, instead of immediately judging them or getting caught up in their content, she would try to simply reflect them, to be aware that thinking was happening without adding a second layer of thought about the first layer. When emotions arose, instead of immediately trying to push them away or figure out why she was feeling them, she would try to simply reflect them, to notice that sadness was present or anger was present, the way a mirror might notice a cloud passing across its surface. It was harder than she expected. Her mind wanted to comment on everything, to judge, to analyze, to fix. But gradually, she learned to find that space of pure awareness beneath all the commentary. And she discovered that Eiji was right. There was a peace in simply reflecting reality without trying to change it. One evening, a wealthy merchant came to Eiji's workshop in great distress. He had commissioned an elaborate mirror for his home, but when Eiji delivered it, the merchant had rejected it. "This mirror makes me look old," the merchant complained. "It shows every flaw, every line on my face. I want a mirror that makes me look better." Eiji listened patiently, then said gently, "The mirror shows you exactly as you are. If you look old, it's because you are aging, as all humans do. The mirror doesn't judge this as good or bad. It simply reflects truth." "Then I don't want truth," the merchant said angrily. "I want to look young and handsome." "I could make you a distorted mirror," Eiji offered. "One that softens lines and changes proportions. It would lie to you, but perhaps that would make you happier." The merchant paused, realizing how foolish he sounded. He looked at himself in the clear mirror again, really looked. Yes, he was aging. Yes, there were lines on his face, but the mirror wasn't judging him. Only he was judging himself. "The mirror accepts you exactly as you are," Eiji said softly. "Perhaps you could learn to do the same." The merchant stood there for a long time, looking at his reflection without judgment, trying to see himself the way the mirror saw him. Just a face, just a person, just what is, without the weight of good or bad, young or old, handsome or ugly. Finally, he nodded. "I'll take the mirror," he said quietly. Years later, when Hana had become a master mirror maker herself, students would ask her the same question she had once asked Eiji. "What does a mirror have to teach?" And she would reply, just as Eiji had, "A mirror teaches us pure awareness. It shows us that we can experience life without constantly judging it, resisting it, trying to change it into something else. We can simply reflect what is, clearly and faithfully, without distortion. And in that clear reflection, we find a peace that judgment can never provide." She would hold up a polished mirror, turning it so light played across its surface. "Your deepest nature is like this mirror, pure awareness that reflects everything but clings to nothing, that sees everything but judges nothing, that accepts everything exactly as it is. When you can rest in this mirror-like awareness, even for a moment, you discover that peace doesn't depend on changing what you reflect. It depends on reflecting clearly, without adding the distortion of your own resistance and judgment." Tonight, as you rest, you might practice mirror awareness. Let thoughts appear and disappear like images crossing a mirror's surface. Let feelings rise and fall like reflections that come and go. Don't judge what appears. Don't try to change it. Just reflect it clearly, the way a mirror reflects light, faithfully, honestly, without adding anything of your own. You are not the content of your thoughts and feelings. You are the awareness that reflects them. And that awareness, like a perfect mirror, is always clear, always peaceful, always unchanged by whatever passes across its surface. Rest in your mirror nature tonight. Reflect everything, cling to nothing, judge nothing. Just be aware, purely and simply aware, and let that awareness be enough. In a prosperous town, there was a merchant named Isamu who seemed to have everything a person could want. He owned the largest trading company in the region. His warehouses were full of goods from distant lands. His home was filled with luxuries. His closets overflowed with fine clothing. His tables were always laden with the best food. Yet Isamu was never satisfied. When he acquired a new property, he immediately began planning how to acquire the next one. When he closed a profitable deal, he was already anxious about the next quarter's numbers. When he purchased something expensive and rare, the pleasure lasted only until he heard about something even more rare that someone else owned. He was like a man dying of thirst at a banquet, surrounded by abundance but unable to drink. A traveling monk named Shin En arrived in town one day and took up residence at the local temple. People came to him with their problems, and he offered what wisdom he could. His reputation reached Isamu, who decided to visit, not because he thought he had a problem, but because meeting a famous monk was another item to acquire, another experience to collect. "Monk Shinen," Isamu said, bowing respectfully, "I've heard you can help people find peace. Though I must tell you, I'm quite content. I just came to hear your wisdom for my own edification." Shinen looked at Isamu carefully, at his expensive robes, his distracted eyes, the way his fingers drummed constantly against his leg. "I see," the monk said. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, that would be fine." Shinen prepared tea, but when he poured it into Isamu's cup, he poured very little, just barely enough to wet the bottom of the cup. "More, please," Isamu said, surprised. Shin-en poured another small amount. "That's not enough!" "Fill the cup." Shin-en poured a bit more, but still left the cup mostly empty. "Why won't you fill my cup?" Isamu asked, irritated now. "Why won't you fill yours?" Shin-en replied quietly. Isamu looked confused. "What do you mean? I don't have the teapot. You have warehouses of goods, rooms of treasures, accounts full of money. Your life's cup is overflowing, yet you sit there telling me it's not enough, demanding more. How is this different from asking me to fill a cup that's already full?" Isamu opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked down at the barely filled teacup. "I'm going to tell you a story," Shinen said, setting down the teapot. "In Buddhist teaching, there are beings called hungry ghosts. They're depicted with huge, swollen bellies and tiny, narrow throats. They're always hungry because their enormous appetite can never be satisfied through their constricted throats. They're surrounded by food, but they can never eat enough to fill their vast emptiness." He poured a full cup of tea now and set it before Isamu. "You're not poor," Shinen continued. "You're not lacking in resources. But you're a hungry ghost nonetheless. You have the belly of enormous craving and the throat of acquisition that can never satisfy that craving. So no matter how much you accumulate, you remain empty." Isamu felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. He thought about the meal he'd eaten that morning. Expensive delicacies from across the sea. Had he even tasted them? He'd been thinking about a business deal the whole time, eating mechanically, barely noticing the food. "How do I stop being a hungry ghost?" he asked quietly. "By noticing that you're trying to fill an emptiness with things that cannot fill it," Shinen replied. "The emptiness isn't in your warehouses or your accounts. It's here." He touched his own chest. "You feel this hole inside you, this sense of not enough, and you think more possessions, more success, more experiences will fill it, but they can't. You're trying to solve a spiritual problem with material solutions. So I should give everything away? Become poor? No, poverty wouldn't solve your problem either. You'd just be a hungry ghost with empty hands instead of full ones. The problem isn't what you have or don't have. It's the craving itself. It's the inability to be present and satisfied with what is." Shinen gestured to the full teacup. "Drink this. Actually drink it. Don't think about anything else. Just taste the tea." Isamu lifted the cup and drank. He tried to focus only on the experience, the warmth of the liquid, the slightly bitter taste, the subtle aroma. For perhaps 10 seconds, he was fully present with just this simple experience of drinking tea. "How was it?" Shinen asked. "It was good. Really good, actually. You've probably drunk 1,000 cups of tea. Have you tasted many of them? Or were you always thinking about something else, wanting something else, planning something else?" Isamu realized he couldn't remember the last time he had actually paid attention to something he was experiencing. He was always partly elsewhere, partly in the future he was planning, partly in the past he was analyzing, partly in the fantasy of what he didn't yet have. He was never fully here. "The hungry ghost," Shinen explained, "suffers not from lack of food, but from inability to digest. You suffer not from lack of good things in your life, but from inability to receive them, to be nourished by them. Every experience, every possession, every achievement passes through you without truly being absorbed, because you're already reaching for the next thing." Isamu stayed with Shinen for many hours that day, and returned many times over the following months. The monk taught him something radical: how to stop in the middle of craving and simply notice it. When you feel that sense of "I need more, I must have that, this isn't enough," Shinen instructed, stop. Don't act on the craving immediately, just feel it. Notice where it lives in your body. Notice how it thinks it knows what will satisfy you, and then notice whether this craving has ever truly been satisfied by getting what it wanted. Isamu began this practice. When he felt the urge to acquire something new, he would pause. He would notice the craving, how it felt like a kind of pain, like hunger or thirst, how it promised that satisfaction was just one more acquisition away. And he began to notice something he had never seen before. The craving was never satisfied. Every time he gave into it, every time he acquired what he thought he needed, the craving would subside for a moment, and then immediately attach to something else. He wasn't filling the emptiness. He was feeding an insatiable appetite that grew larger the more he fed it. One day, Isamu was in his warehouse, looking at shelves packed with goods. He'd been feeling the urge to acquire a rare textile from a distant province, but instead of immediately sending someone to purchase it, he paused. He looked around at what he already had, really looked. Fabrics of incredible beauty, objects of real value, things that craftspeople had poured their skill into creating. When had he last really appreciated any of them? He picked up a piece of silk, feeling its texture, noticing its quality. He had owned this for 3 years and had never really looked at it. He had bought it, stored it, and forgotten it, his attention already on the next acquisition. For the first time, he felt something that wasn't craving. It was appreciation. Gratitude even, for what was actually here. The urge to acquire the new textile didn't disappear entirely, but it loosened its grip. Maybe he didn't need it. Maybe what he already had was enough. Years passed. Isamu remained a successful merchant, but his relationship with his success changed completely. He still worked, still traded, still earned money, but the desperate quality was gone. He could enjoy what he had instead of always straining toward what he didn't have. When Shinen prepared to leave town, continuing his travels, Isamu came to say goodbye. "Thank you," Isamu said, bowing deeply. "You taught me how to not be a hungry ghost." "I taught you nothing," Shinen replied. "You already had everything you needed. You just weren't present enough to receive it. The hungry ghost doesn't lack food. He lacks the ability to taste what's in his mouth because he's already thinking about the next bite. You learned to actually taste your life. That's all." He smiled and placed a hand on Isamu's shoulder. "The irony is that now, with less craving, you probably enjoy your wealth more than when you were desperately accumulating it. Satisfaction doesn't come from having everything. It comes from being present to what you have. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might notice your own hungry ghost. The part of you that always wants more, that's never quite satisfied, that's already thinking about tomorrow instead of receiving today. What if, just for these hours of rest, you allowed yourself to be satisfied? What if nothing needed to be added, improved, or changed? What if this moment, exactly as it is, was enough? The craving promises that satisfaction is just ahead, just out of reach. One more thing, one more achievement, one more experience. But that satisfaction never arrives, because craving itself is the obstacle to satisfaction. Let yourself rest in enoughness tonight. You have enough. You are enough. This moment is enough. The hungry ghost can rest now. Let satisfaction come not from adding more, but from finally, fully receiving what's already here. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.